Chapter 687. After a day of recuperation, Lu Yi had completely recovered. Yi Liuli's recovery ability wasn't as terrifying as his, but at least she was fine. The two of them prepared to leave for Tyrannical Saber Mountain Villa tomorrow morning to take revenge. When they were resting at night, Yi, who was on guard nearby, discovered the figures of these cultivators. That was why Lu Yi brought Yi Liuli to find them. Their brazen appearance caused the cultivators to be overjoyed. They all knew about Yi Lu and Yi Luli's cultivation. One was at the 6th Order Cloud River Realm, while the other had just broken through to the Cloud River Realm. None of them were inferior to the Yi siblings in terms of cultivation, so they didn't think that the siblings would pose any threat to them. When they discovered the siblings, they all stood up and rushed over to kill them. "Take care of yourself." Yi Liuli was still nervous when her sixth brother's voice rang in her ears. Then, she saw her sixth brother's figure turn into an afterimage and crash into the enemy's formation like a fierce tiger. Under the moonlight, a bright saber light cut through the night sky like a meteor, and a rain of blood suddenly fell. Screams followed. Yi Liuli stared at her sixth brother's figure in a daze, as if she was in a dream. Tyrannical Saber Mountain Villa's Villa Master Ying had 6 sons and 1 daughter. All of them were outstanding talents, dragons and phoenixes among men, but there was no conclusion as to which one of them was the most talented. Among them, Yi Lu had been traveling outside since he was 16, and on average, he only returned to Tyrannical Saber Mountain Villa once or twice a year. Search. Therefore, even if Lu Ye's current identity was Yi Liuli's sixth brother, Yi Liuli wasn't too clear about his strength. Previously, in the cave, Lu Yi suddenly attacked and killed a 7th Order body cultivator with 3 saber strikes, which made Yi Liuli feel incredulous. But at that time, she didn't think too much about it, only thinking that her sixth brother had used some kind of desperate secret technique. But now, it seemed that it was her sixth brother's true ability, not some kind of secret technique. In her vision, her sixth brother held his saber and charged forward. Even if he was facing 4 enemies whose cultivation wasn't inferior to his, he was fearless. With just 1 strike, he killed one of them. That kind of invincible saber technique seemed similar to the tyrannical saber technique, but there seemed to be something different. Just as this thought flashed through his mind, a second person screamed out. His chest was cut open by a saber, and his beating heart was clearly visible. With such an injury, it was clear that he wouldn't live for long. As the saber light flashed, it was already heading towards the third person. Feeling an indescribable pressure, that person's face turned ashen and his spiritual power became somewhat stagnant. He had never encountered such a thing before. Even though it was rumored that the Tyrannical Saber Mountain Villa's tyrannical saber art was incomparably tyrannical and was best at using the weak to defeat the strong, such a performance was too exaggerated. Was Yi Lu still human? The cultivation he displayed was indeed only at the 6th Order Cloud River Realm, far inferior to any of them, but under the pitch-black saber that seemed capable of swallowing even the moonlight, they were like helpless little chicks, unable to put up any resistance. All they could do was stretch out their necks and wait to be stabbed, unable to fight back at all. The strength of the spiritual energy made him feel frightened, and the speed and angle of the other party's attack was even more overwhelming. In just 2 breaths of time, the web between his thumb and forefinger had already cracked, and his spiritual energy was surging, making it difficult for him to control himself. "My life is over." Just as he was thinking about this, the last person grit his teeth and rushed towards Yi Liuli. He was lucky that he hadn't been targeted by Lu Yi in time, but seeing Lu Ye's ferocity, how could he not know that he had kicked an iron plate? Now, if he wanted to live, his only option was to capture Yi Liuli's 7th young lady and use her as a hostage. Yi Lu was so ferocious, but it was impossible for Yi Liuli to be the same, right? It had to be said that this person's reaction was very fast. In such a desperate situation, he had found a good way to break out of it. Seeing one of the enemies rushing towards her, how could Yi Liuli not know the other party's plan? She knew that she wasn't his opponent, but she also didn't want to cause trouble for her sixth brother, so without hesitation, she turned around and ran. At that moment, a golden arc slashed over from the side. Yi Liuli turned her head and saw Yi standing there. Spiritual energy surged between her fair hands, And as the spiritual energy surged, streaks of golden arcs shot out like they were chasing the stars and the moon. Sister-in-law. Yi Liuli was overjoyed. When she had followed Lu Yi here, he hadn't shown up because he had been monitoring this place and keeping in touch with Lu Yi. Now that she saw Yi Yi's figure, she immediately rushed towards her. The word, sister-in-law, caused Yi to lose her breath, and the technique in her hands suddenly collapsed. Even Lu Yi, who was on the other side, suddenly slowed down his blade. Did I hear wrong? A tiger's roar echoed through the forest. Hu Po's mighty body rushed out from the side. This cultivator was already in a sorry state after being beaten by Yi's technique, and Hu Po's roar shook his mind, causing his blood to boil. By the time he came back to his senses, he had already been pushed to the ground by Hu Po. A huge tiger's head was looking down at him, a pair of tiger eyes shining with a soul-sucking light. Soul-sucking tiger's roar was Hu Po's innate ability. Back when he was in the spirit stream realm, he had helped Lu Yi quite a bit. Now that Hu Po's strength had increased, the power of this ability had increased by a lot. Even if this person was a 6th-order Cloud River Realm cultivator, he still couldn't tell east from west from the tiger's roar. He still wanted to resist, but a figure had already slowly appeared in his field of vision, holding a blood-stained saber. With a light swing, the saber returned to its scabbard. There were no sounds of fighting nearby, nor were there any screams. The battle had already ended. This cultivator was horrified. How could he not know that his 3 companions had all been killed? 6th young Lord Ye's strength was far beyond everyone's imagination. Even a 9th-order Cloud River Realm cultivator wouldn't be able to match such strength. 6th young Lord, please spare my life. Being a fish on the chopping block, this person begged for mercy without any hesitation. Under the night sky, Lu Yi looked down at the cultivator in front of him and said calmly, "If you want to live, then prove your worth." If 6th young Lord has any questions, this Su will tell you everything he knows. I only ask that 6th young Lord spare my life. This person's mind was still very sharp. He knew that the reason he didn't die wasn't because Lu Yi couldn't kill him, but because Lu Yi wanted to keep him alive to ask some questions. This could be seen from his action of wanting to take down Yi Luli when he saw that the situation wasn't good. But words are no guarantee. 6th young Lord still needs to swear a great heart demon oath. This person naturally wouldn't believe the promise from Lu Ye's mouth. There was no such thing as a heaven's secret oath in the soaring dragon realm, but a great heart demon oath was similar. The binding force wasn't too strong, but it was still better than nothing. If 6th young Lord isn't willing, then kill me. After he finished speaking, he closed his eyes and assumed a posture of accepting death. His attitude was both soft and hard. It had to be said that this person's reaction to a crisis was sufficient. However, from the other party's uneasy and nervous expression, he wasn't as calm as he showed. Good. Lu Yi didn't waste any time and immediately swore a great heart demon oath. Can you speak now? This cultivator surnamed Su didn't expect Lu Yi to be so straightforward. For a moment, he wasn't too used to it. However, Lu Yi had indeed swore a great heart demon oath. If he dared to ask again at this time, he was afraid that he would really be chopped to death. May I know what 6th young Lord wants to ask? After a while, Lu Ye's expression was still indifferent. On the contrary, Yi Luli had a look of disbelief, as if she couldn't accept the information she heard. She kept shaking her head. Impossible, how could this kind of thing happen? Yi gently wrapped an arm around her shoulder. That's all I know. After the cultivator surnamed Su finished speaking, he looked at Lu Yi with apprehension. Lu Yi nodded. Then let's be on our way. The cultivator surnamed Su sensed that something was wrong. Then, a flash of saber light appeared in front of his eyes and his consciousness went completely still. Lu Yi sheathed his saber, his expression calm. What does 6th young Lord Ye's great heart demon oath have to do with me? Yi Luli sobbed softly, comforting. Lu Yi stood in place, deep in thought. Last time, when MF went to the Beast Region's secret realm, Xia Qianqian had told him that things that happened in secret realms were generally things that had happened in the past. They were reproduced through some incomprehensible method. Thus, The people they met in secret realms weren't necessarily living people. Perhaps they were just silhouettes from a certain era that outsiders like them couldn't see through. Moreover, when cultivators entered secret realms, it was usually when something major happened in the world. Lu Yi originally thought that the massacre of the tyrannical Saber Mountain Villa would lead to something incredible. For example, it would affect the power structure of the soaring dragon realm. In the end, after hearing the cultivator surnamed Su's explanation, Lu Yi realized that he was overthinking things. If things really were as the cultivator surnamed Su said, then the destruction of the tyrannical Saber Mountain Villa was merely a show of brothers reading a wall. This kind of thing obviously wasn't a big deal for an entire realm. Although it was a bit melodramatic, human nature was complex. Such things were bound to happen. Although the tyrannical Saber Mountain Villa was founded by Yi Ying, it still had a second master. That second master was none other than Yi Ying's half-brother, Yi Xiong. In terms of status, he could be considered sixth young Lord Ye's second uncle. Moreover, he was his biological second uncle. When Lu Yi entered the secret realm, he obtained some simple information about this cheap second uncle. However, because sixth young Lord Yi wasn't in the tyrannical Saber Mountain Villa all year round, he didn't know much about this cheap second uncle. In his impression, this guy was a very dignified middle-aged man. Yi Ying once married Madame Guo, but she passed away 3 months after giving birth to Yi Lioli. After so many years, Yi Ying never remarried. Unlike Yi Ying and his wife, who were deeply in love with each other, Yi Xiong had many wives and concubines. The two brothers didn't just have a clear contrast in marriage, they also had a clear contrast in their children. Yi Ying only married one person, but he had 6 sons and 1 daughter. Yi Xiong had many wives and concubines, but after so many years he only had 1 son. Moreover, that son was congenitally deficient and sickly. The relationship between the two brothers wasn't too good, but it wasn't bad either. Lu Yi really couldn't figure out what had caused this kind of brothers to read a wall. Chapter 688. 10 miles away from the tyrannical Saber Mountain Villa, there was a village called Everlasting Wind. Most of the farmers in the village had received the kindness of the tyrannical Saber Mountain Villa, so their customs were simple and honest. Lu Yi placed Yi Lioli in a farmer's house and asked Yi and Hu to stay behind to look after her. He took advantage of the night and went to the tyrannical Saber Mountain Villa alone. Yi Lioli fainted from the sudden change and hearing such grievous news. She had not woken up yet. He was not worried that someone would leak the secret. Although the farmers here were not cultivators, they were people who knew how to repay kindness. They had lived peacefully under the protection of the tyrannical Saber Mountain Villa all these years, so they naturally recognized 6th young Master Yi and 7th young Mistress Yi. There would not be too much of a problem if Yi Lioli was placed here. Furthermore, Yi and Hu were protecting her. If anything happened, Yi could send a message to Lu Yi at any time. This was a convenience that the cultivators of the Soaring Dragon realm did not have. The cultivators of this realm also had communication methods, but compared to the communication methods of the cultivators of the 9 prefectures, it was far inferior. The communication methods of the cultivators of the Soaring Dragon realm mostly relied on a type of sound transmission stone. Not only could they not send too much information at once, but there was also a huge restriction on the distance. After a certain distance, they would not be able to contact each other. It was unlike the 9 prefectures, where as long as they were in the same space, they could contact each other at any time no matter how far away they were. The moon was dark and the wind was strong. Lu Yi walked towards the tyrannical Saber Mountain Villa neither too fast nor too slow. He arrived very quickly. The tyrannical Saber Mountain Villa was not small. There were pavilions scattered all over the mountain villa, and there was also a man-made saber lake. Looking down from above, the shape of the lake was like a huge saber character embedded in the entire tyrannical Saber Mountain Villa. The water in the lake could connect to every location of the mountain villa. The mountain villa was backed by a continuous mountain range. In the past, this place was also a place with beautiful scenery. However, after the battle a few days ago, this originally beautiful place had a hint of desolation. Many buildings had been destroyed. There were many figures walking back and forth in the mountain villa. These were the guards and servants of the mountain villa. Although the tyrannical Saber Mountain Villa was a force, it was different from those sects and forces. Its nature was still a family force. In the previous battle, many guards and servants were killed. Some escaped, but some managed to preserve their lives and were still here. Until now. After all, even though the Manor Lord had died and his children had also died, the second Manor Lord was still alive. If it was the real sixth young Master Yi, he would naturally be extremely familiar with the tyrannical Saber Mountain Villa. However, Lu Yi was an outsider after all. Even if he had some information, there were many details that he did not know. He activated the concealment and breath-restraining spiritual inscriptions to enhance himself and walked leisurely in the villa, looking for his target. A cry of alarm suddenly came from a certain direction. Lu Ye's heart skipped a beat and he headed in that direction, soon arriving outside a small courtyard. The shrill screams became clearer and clearer, as if a woman was being beaten up. Amidst the cries and begging for mercy, a voice filled with hostility could be heard, "Bitch, bitch, go to hell, cough, cough, cough." The attacker's aura was weak and he seemed to be in poor health. He was coughing violently as he fought. Lu Yi immediately understood who this person was. It was the only son of that cheap second uncle, Yi Lang. "Young master, please spare my life. Young master, please spare my life." The beaten woman begged bitterly. However, it was completely useless. Instead, he was beaten even more viciously. Lu Yi frowned. Ever since he stepped into the cultivation world, the people he came into contact with were basically cultivators. He had basically never interacted with ordinary people. There was a clear distinction between the realms of cultivators, and it was easy to distinguish the strong from the weak. If there was a grudge between them, it would be nothing more than a life and death battle. It was rare to see such wanton bullying, which made him somewhat uncomfortable. The beating in the house suddenly stopped, and only the woman's helpless sobs could be heard. Yi Lang's voice rang out, "Lily, don't cry. You hurt, right? I don't know what happened to me just now. I didn't want to hit you, cough, cough, cough. Young master, please spare my life." The woman continued to beg for mercy. Yi Lang's voice turned cold. "Why is Lily talking to me like this? It seems that you can't teach her well. Then what's the use of having you?" The woman's voice became even more terrified. "Young master, I will learn well. I will learn well, but you are not Lioli after all." There were two soft thuds. The two guards who had been guarding outside the house fell to the ground, and the smell of blood filled the air. This strange movement stunned Yi Lang inside the house. However, he was an ordinary person who had never cultivated before, so he didn't realize what was happening outside. He opened his mouth and shouted, "What's the matter?" The door was suddenly pushed open, and a figure walked in. Yi Lang was furious. "Who said you could come in?" Before he could finish his words, his face suddenly turned to one of horror as he stared in horror at the figure before him. Almost unable to believe his eyes, he pointed a finger at Lu Yi and stammered, "You can't believe you're seeing Yi Lu here. Shouldn't this guy be dead?" At the door, Lu Ye's eyes swept over and saw the pale Yi Lang, and a young girl with a face full of scars kneeling at his feet. This young girl's appearance and figure, at first glance, looked somewhat similar to Yi Lioli. He wondered where Yi Lang found her. And from the few words he said when he beat people up, this guy seemed to have some unsettled thoughts about Yi Lioli. It was just that he didn't dare to show it before, but now he was unscrupulous. Yi Lang was congenitally deficient and had been a sickly person since birth. Fortunately, the domineering Saber Mountain Villa wasn't an ordinary family, so they had enough resources to nourish his body. Otherwise, he would have died many years ago. But even so, he was constantly suffering from major and minor illnesses. It was precisely because he had been tortured by illness since childhood that Yi Lang's temperament was extremely twisted. When Yi Ying was in charge of the family, he didn't dare to be too presumptuous and did many dirty things secretly. Now that Yi Ying's family had either died or fled, there was no longer any restraint, and he was completely exposed. "Sixth brother, you're still alive?" After a moment of shock, Yi Lang revealed a pleasantly surprised expression. Even his face was brimming with a smile from the bottom of his heart, as if he was happy for Lu Ye's survival. If father knew, he would definitely be very happy. Does father know that you're back? Yi Lang asked. Lu Yi looked at him indifferently, and his heart was filled with admiration. Such a guy, his body was already so weak, but he was still so greedy for beauty. It could be said that his will was strong. And as an ordinary person who had never cultivated, being able to have such a reaction was enough to show his temperament. Under normal circumstances, an ordinary person wouldn't have such a reaction speed. Previously, in Huayan Mountain, he had heard some information from the pursuers, but he wasn't very interested in it. He just wanted to know the whole story. After all, since he had become the sixth young Master Yi, then he had to act according to his identity as the sixth young Master Yi. There had to be someone to take revenge on. Now, it seemed that the information that the pursuers had revealed before they died was not wrong. The destruction of the domineering Saber Mountain Villa was indeed a show of brothers reading the wall. Otherwise, it wouldn't make sense that Yi Ying's family had either died or fled, and Yi Xiong, the only son, could still live here peacefully and even enjoy himself. Sixth brother, why are you looking at me like that? I'm your cousin. Yi Lang's expression was flustered, because the way Lu Yi looked at him was obviously a bit strange. And he didn't know why, but he always felt that his cousin gave people a very strange feeling. At this point, he opened his mouth to shout, as if he wanted to warn, but before he could say anything, a stream of light broke through the air, pierced through his mouth, and went in and out of the back of his head. Since he started cultivating, Lu Yi had never killed an ordinary person. The people he killed were all cultivators of the Wanmo Ridge who wanted to harm him. In any case, Zhuoxi was a cultivator, so it was a bit unreasonable for him to kill some mortals. But killing this Yi Lang, he didn't feel the slightest psychological pressure. The corpse fell on its back. The young girl, who looked somewhat similar to Yi Lioli, didn't react. She turned her head blankly and looked at the corpse that fell to the side, red and white things flowing on the ground. Only then did she wake up. She turned her head and looked at Lu Yi with tears in her eyes. Sixth young master, annoyed by Xie Ping and Tu Shaoqi, this young girl should have been a maid of the tyrannical Saber Mountain Villa. The person who punched and kicked her just now died in front of her eyes, but she didn't panic. Instead, she felt relieved and happy. Today, if it wasn't for the arrival of the sixth young master, she was afraid that she would have been beaten to death. Sixth young master, leave quickly. The second manor master will be here soon. The young girl hurriedly said. Yi Xiong cherished his only son very much. Every night, he would come to see him. Although the young girl was an ordinary person and had never cultivated, she knew that the sixth young master was not the second manor master's opponent. The sixth young master killed that bastard, so how could the second manor master let it go? At that time, the sixth young master would be doomed. Then I won't have to look for him. Lu Yi raised his eyebrows and changed his plan. He originally sneaked in with the intention of killing, but since the main character sent himself to the door, he didn't need to look everywhere. After all, he wasn't familiar with the tyrannical Saber Mountain Villa. If he really wanted to find him, it would be a troublesome matter. Glancing at the young girl covered in a thin gauze, Lu Yi raised his hand and took out a piece of his clothing and threw it to her. The young girl woke up from her dream and hurriedly put it on. Don't leave for now. It's not safe. You can leave after you've dealt with this matter. Lu Yi warned. The young girl was a bit distracted. She secretly thought that the sixth young master gave people a different feeling than before. In the past, the sixth young master didn't return to the tyrannical Saber Mountain Villa. However, every time he came back, he would be cheerful and cheerful. This time, however, he seemed to be somewhat taciturn. However, she could understand. After all, no matter who it was that suddenly encountered such a drastic change, their personality would more or less change. But no matter what, the servants of the tyrannical Saber Mountain Villa had a good impression of the young masters. This was because Yi Ying was an upright person. In his words and actions, his children were all upright and upright people. They would never do things like seek personal gain. Chapter 689. Inside the room, the door was tightly shut. Lu Yi sat boldly on an armchair, the mountain saber casually placed beside his hand. His eyes were closed as he rested. The young girl who looked somewhat similar to Yi Lioli stood to the side. The room was filled with corpses, and the stench of blood filled the air. It was nauseating, but the young girl wasn't afraid at all. The sixth young master by her side gave her a great sense of security. Sneaking a few glances at Lu Yi, the young girl suddenly said, "Sixth young master, the head manor master was killed by the second manor master." Lu Yi opened his eyes and turned to look at her. He asked curiously, "How do you know?" An ordinary person who had never cultivated, even if he was a servant of the domineering Saber Mountain Villa, shouldn't know too many secrets. After all, even Lu Yi and Yi Lioli didn't know the whole story. The young girl pointed at the corpse on the ground. "He was talking nonsense and told me some things." Lu Yi understood. Yi Lang was abnormal. If he thought the young girl was Yi Lioli, it was possible that he would say some nonsense when he was excited. This allowed the young girl to know some of his secrets. "What did you hear?" Even though he wasn't very interested in the domineering Saber Mountain Villa's matters, it would be good if he could figure it out. In the end, he still had to give Yi Lioli an explanation. The young girl organized her words, then said, "The root of the matter should be him. Actually, when the head manor master was here, he often used his status to do some shady things. However, he was loyal to the manor master, so he didn't go too far. Until a few days ago, he seemed to have done something extremely evil. As for what it was, I don't know. Although the second manor master hid it, the head manor master still found out. The head manor master was furious and ordered him to be locked up. Actually, the head manor master already knew about his bad behavior, but he didn't punish him because he was the second manor master's only son. A few days ago, the head manor master went out for some business. The second manor master contacted the Divine Will sect and revealed the head manor master's location. That was why the head manor master met with misfortune. Then, the Divine Will sect came to attack the manor master. That's why this happened. At this point, she suddenly remembered something. "Sixth young master, there seems to be people from the Divine Will sect in the manor." "I understand." Lu Yi nodded slightly. It wasn't much different from what he had heard from the pursuers, but it was more detailed. The destruction of the tyrannical Saber Villa was caused by the brothers' discord. To protect his only son's life, Yi Xiong had colluded with the Divine Will sect, which led to the subsequent events. Lu Yi didn't know why Yi Xiong would do such a thing. But if it was for Yi Lang, then it made sense. Yi Xiong cared a lot about his only son. He had a lot of wives and concubines, but in the end he only had one son. Compared to Ying, who had a lot of children, he was afraid that his heart was not balanced. Moreover, his only son was a sickly invalid. It was uncertain whether he could continue his family line. Yi Ying's 6 sons and 1 daughter were all dragons and phoenixes among men. Human nature was indeed very complicated. Unfortunately, Yi Lang, whom he had spent so much effort to protect, was now lying on the ground like a dead dog. Even his corpse was ice cold. "Shoo!" Lu Yi suddenly raised a finger. The young girl quickly shut her mouth, her face becoming tense. Outside the courtyard, a figure slowly walked in. It was the second master of the tyrannical Saber Villa, Yi Xiong. His expression was dignified and stern, and there was a helpless look on his face. Colluding with the Divine Will sect was like asking a tiger for its skin, but he had no other choice. In the past, when that evil creature had made many mistakes, Ying didn't make a fuss about it for his sake. He only asked him to teach him well. But this time, that evil creature had done too many things. He had raped and killed several good women. This made Ying furious. He had to make the first move to gain the upper hand. Otherwise, his only son's life would be in danger. But now, although he had saved that evil creature's life, he had fallen into a whirlpool, unable to extricate himself. From now on, the tyrannical Saber Villa would no longer exist. This place would only become a branch of the Divine Will sect. This made him depressed. Before, in the tyrannical Saber Villa, although Ying had suppressed him, they were still brothers. In the future, he would have to listen to the Divine Will sect. His days would not be as free as before. It was all that evil creature's fault. Thinking of this, Yi Xiong was furious. He was about to teach that evil creature a lesson when he suddenly stopped. Yi Xiong sniffed lightly and his face changed. There was a faint smell of blood in the air. He jumped up and directly rushed into the courtyard. At a glance, he saw the bodies of the 2 guards lying outside the door. In the room, there were 2 auras. One of them had a beating heart and seemed to be very nervous. He was an ordinary person, so there was no need to pay too much attention to him. The other person? How could it be? Yi Xiong looked panicked. He stepped forward and slammed the door open. What he saw made his pupils shrink. Inside the room, on an armchair, a person he didn't expect was sitting upright, looking at him indifferently. At the feet of this person, a familiar figure was lying there. He didn't know how long he had been dead. Yi Lu. Yi Xiong gritted his teeth and roared. His spiritual power and blood boiled. The anger in his chest was like a volcano erupting. He didn't expect that Yi Lu, who should have died long ago, would appear in the tyrannical saber villa and kill his only son. Although that evil creature didn't do anything and made people worry, he was still his son. He was his hope to continue his family line. But now he was dead. Just like that, he died without a sound, just like a dead dog. How could he not be angry? You deserve to die. Yi Xiong roared and rushed towards Lu Yi without any hesitation or nonsense. If Yi Ying wanted to execute his son, then he would find a way to kill Yi Ying. If Yi Lu killed his son, then he would have to be buried with him. Yi Xiong's hair stood on end. He had never been so angry before. As he rushed forward, a long saber appeared in his hand. At the same time, Lu Yi also rushed out to kill. There was still an ordinary person beside him, so he naturally couldn't let Yi Xiong kill him. Otherwise, the aftermath of their fight would be enough to crush the girl. He had already arranged a protective array around the girl. As long as the battlefield wasn't inside the room, the girl's life wouldn't be in danger. The 2 figures collided in the blink of an eye. 2 long sabers of almost the same length and shape collided. Sparks flew and the sound of blades rang out. Lu Yi only felt a huge force coming towards him, causing his right hand to shake. Yi Xiong's attack revealed his cultivation realm at a glance. Cloud River 8th Order. In the Soaring Dragon realm, there were many Cloud River realm cultivators, but the proportion of 9th Order cultivators was not high. Compared to the 9 states, this proportion was much lower. Perhaps it was related to the unique environment of this realm, but after a cultivator reached the Cloud River realm, their cultivation progress was extremely slow. Especially from the 8th Order to the 9th Order, there seemed to be a huge barrier. But in the 9 states, there was no such thing. From the 8th Order to the 9th Order, as long as one accumulated enough spirit energy, they could safely break through. Therefore, among the great forces of the Soaring Dragon realm, there might be many 8th Order cultivators, but there would never be many 9th Order cultivators. This was also the reason why the tyrannical Saber Mountain Villa, which was only a family-like force, could occupy a place in the Feng state. Yi Ying was a 9th Order master, while Yi Xiong, the second Manor Lord, was only an 8th Order master. However, due to the difficulty of breaking through, the Cloud River realm cultivators of the Soaring Dragon realm were generally stronger than those of the 9 states. Because they had been in this realm for a longer time, they could polish their cultivation more. So, when they fought, Lu Yi felt some difference. If he had not entered the 100 Formation Tower, facing an 8th Order cultivator like Yi Xiong, he might have had a hard time. But the trip to the 100 Formation Tower had raised his cultivation by a minor realm. If this kind of improvement was placed on other cultivators, even if their strength had increased, it would still be within the normal range. But for someone like Jie Dunshin, whose foundation was incomparably strong, a minor realm increase was enough for his strength to increase tremendously. There was pressure, but it was not much. Yi Xiong's strength was within expectations. Compared to Lu Ye's indifference, Yi Xiong was truly shocked. Because his angry saber attack had actually been taken away. How was this possible? He clearly felt that the boy opposite him was 6th Order, 2 minor realms lower than him. He thought that even if his saber attack could not kill the other party, it could still severely injure the other party. But in the end, it did not have the slightest effect. This boy. What's going on? Yi Lu was not in the tyrannical saber manor all year round. Instead, he traveled all over the place. He only came back once or twice a year, so Yi Xiong did not know much about Yi Lu's details. It was only at this moment that he realized that this nephew of his was much more powerful than anyone had imagined. This kind of foundation had already far surpassed that of his brothers. His anger suddenly subsided. He suddenly remembered that before he came, Lu Ye's figure was sitting calmly. No wonder he was so fearless. It turned out that he had something to rely on. But so what? Yi Lang was dead. Someone had to be buried with him. Die! Yi Xiong roared and slashed again with his saber. In a small courtyard, two figures were fighting close to each other. Saber light flashed, and an invisible force raged. The walls of the courtyard and the house collapsed with a loud bang. Inside the collapsed house, a young girl's scream could be heard. Fortunately, there was a protective array protecting her, so she did not suffer any injuries. She was only buried in the ruins along with the light curtain protecting her. Clanging sounds rang out along with the huge commotion caused by the exchange of blows. The entire tyrannical Saber Mountain Manor was shocked, but with such a big commotion, no one dared to come over to investigate. Only a single figure flew over from a corner of Saber Lake, the aura of a Cloud River Ninth Order cultivator radiating from his body. In the tyrannical Saber Manor, there was no other Ninth Order Cloud River Realm cultivator besides Yi Ying. Now that Yi Ying was dead, there was suddenly a new master. Obviously, he was an outsider. Divine Will Sect's Vice Sect Master Pang Wanhai came to the tyrannical Saber Manor for no other reason than the tyrannical Saber technique. Chapter 690. Tyrannical Saber Villa and Divine Will Sect both belonged to Feng Province, so there was naturally some friction between them. In particular, Yi Ying and Divine Will Sect's sect master Xiong Tai Shan had a grudge when they were young, so Yi Xiong chose to collude with Divine Will Sect because he knew that as long as he leaked Yi Ying's whereabouts, Divine Will Sect would definitely take action. In fact, Divine Will Sect didn't fail to live up to his expectations. Xiong Tai Shan personally led 8 elders to set up an ambush and kill Yi Ying in one fell swoop. What happened next was simple. While the Divine Will Sect Master made his move, the Vice Sect Master, Pang Wanhai, led a group of people to attack the hegemonic Saber Manor. As a result, all of Yi Lu's brothers died in battle. Only Yi Lu and Yi Lioli managed to escape. Over the next few days, Pang Wanhai was not in a hurry to leave. Instead, he stayed here to comprehend the Tyrant Saber technique. He had made some gains. In the end, he felt the sounds of an intense fight coming from somewhere in the manor. He was surprised and came to investigate. Arriving near the battlefield, Pang Wanhai looked up and saw 2 figures crisscrossing among the broken walls, their blades flashing. One of them was Yi Xiong, who had just separated from him, while the other was Yi Lu, who should have fled long ago. This surprised Pang Wanhai greatly. In his opinion, Yi Lu was only a 6th Order Cloud River Realm cultivator, yet he was able to fight evenly with Yi Xiong. Pang Wanhai was well aware of Yi Xiong's strength and knew he was stronger than the elders of Divine Will Sect. In the entire Divine Will Sect, only Pang Wanhai and Sect Master Xiong Taishan could suppress him, so how could this Yi Lu be so strong? While observing, he found that although Yi Lu's cultivation base was lower than Yi Xiong's, no matter if it was the speed or strength of his saber, they were not inferior. Moreover, because of his young age, his reaction speed was even faster than Yi Xiong's. This was the reason why he could defeat the strong as the weak. This boy can't be allowed to live. Search. Pang Wanhai immediately thought. If Yi Lu was already so strong at the 6th Order, if he was given enough time to break through to the 8th Order or 9th Order, he would definitely cause endless trouble. Although he didn't know why this kid had returned to the tyrannical Saber Villa, this was a good opportunity to kill him. Pang Wanhai's killing intent surged. On the other side, Yi Xiong, who was fighting with Lu Yi, was more and more surprised. He found that with his current strength, he couldn't do anything to his nephew. This made him both shocked and angry. He sensed Pang Wanhai's arrival and also sensed Pang Wanhai's surging killing intent. However, his only son had died at the hands of Lu Yi, and he wanted to kill him with his own hands to avenge his only son. If he allowed Pang Wanhai to interfere, even if he managed to kill him, he wouldn't feel at ease. Therefore, the moment he sensed Pang Wanhai's murderous intent, Yi Xiong's expression became resolute. In the end, he still had to use that blade technique. The long blade chopped down. This blade was the full force of Yi Xiong's attack. Accompanied by a crisp sound, both his and Lu Ye's figures slightly shook, and both of them floated backwards. At this moment, Lu Yi suddenly felt a sense of danger. This sense of danger didn't come from Pang Wanhai, who was watching from the side, but from Yi Xiong, who had been fighting with him. Lu Yi looked up and saw Yi Xiong not far in front of him squatting down, his hands held flat, one hand holding the saber motionless while the other hand suddenly swept across the blade, pouring his spirit chi into it. The long saber suddenly burst with a dazzling brilliance, its clear mirror-like blade reflecting Yi Xiong's cold gaze. Tyrannical saber technique. Lu Ye's heart jumped. Although he didn't know anything about the so-called tyrannical saber technique, seeing Yi Xiong's momentum suddenly change, he immediately understood what this guy wanted to do. Although the tyrannical saber technique was an ancient inheritance obtained by Yi Xiong, as the second manor lord of tyrannical saber villa, had naturally cultivated it. At this moment, since they couldn't defeat each other for a long time, they could only use the tyrannical saber technique to determine the winner. Just as Lu Ye's thoughts turned, Yi Xiong had already thrust his saber. Along with this strike, Yi Xiong's spirit chi instantly reached its peak, as if it was completely released with this strike. Kill! An angry roar sounded. On the side, Pang Wanhai, who was about to join forces with Yi Xiong to take down Lu Yi, couldn't help but stop, his eyes fixed on Yi Xiong's movements. In the past few days, he had been studying the tyrannical saber technique. Although he had some small gains, there were still some things he didn't understand. Yi Ying was already dead, and the few kids of the Yi family were almost all dead. Now, the only ones who had mastered the tyrannical saber technique were probably these two people surnamed Yi in front of him. Being able to observe the tyrannical saber technique with his own eyes was naturally beneficial for him. A cold light bloomed, and a cold murderous aura enveloped the area. Then, a little bit of starlight bloomed, as if they were suddenly under a moonless night sky. The sky was twinkling with stars, and the world was quiet, with only the chirping of insects and the croaking of frogs. It was a scene of natural harmony. However, all of a sudden, the twinkling stars in the sky fell one after another, carrying the power to destroy the world. The first style of the tyrannical saber, stars. Even Pang Wanhai, who was watching the battle from the side, couldn't help but be frightened by the cold light of the saber. His skin felt cold, and his heart tightened. He was dazzled and didn't want to blink. It was rumored that the tyrannical saber had 3 styles. Except for the first style, stars, which was known to the world, no one knew what the other 2 styles were. It seemed that even Ying had never used the other 2 styles in front of others. But even just this one style was enough for him to establish the tyrannical saber mountain villa in the Feng province. Yi Xiong's strength wasn't as good as Yi Ying's. From the perspective of a bystander, this saber style wasn't perfect, but even if it wasn't perfect, its power was still outrageous. This made Pang Wanhai even more interested in the tyrannical saber art. He secretly made up his mind that after Yi Xiong dealt with this brat, he would have him practice with him. He didn't dare to refuse. In his opinion, once this saber came out, Lu Yi would have no way to survive. Even if it was him, facing such a saber, he could only temporarily dodge. If he took it head-on, even if he didn't die, he would be seriously injured. However, in the next moment, a scene that shocked him appeared. Lu Yi, facing this saber head-on, didn't retreat. Instead, he moved forward, crashing into the stars in the sky. At this moment, Lu Yi suddenly burst out with a power stronger than before. Since the girl had warned Lu Yi that there were people from the Divine Will sect in the mountain villa, how could Lu Yi not be on guard? So when he fought with Yi Xiong, he didn't use his full strength. Until now, he didn't hold back at all. The stars in the sky collapsed, and in a flash, the stars in the sky disappeared without a trace. What? Pang Wanhai's eyelids twitched. He clearly saw that in the face of Yi Xiong's tyrannical saber attack, that brat called Sixth Yi actually sent out more than 10 sabers in a flash, blocking almost all of the attacks. A figure flew out, blood splashing in the sky. It was Yi Xiong, who had been awe-inspiring just a moment ago. Lu Yi stood on the battlefield, his spiritual power and blood mixed together. Especially on his right arm, which was holding the saber, his blood was boiling. If he hadn't cultivated the blood transfer technique, which allowed him to burst out with strength and speed far beyond his normal strength, he wouldn't have been able to block this attack. Even so, Lu Yi lowered his head to look at his abdomen. Dark red blood dyed his clothes red. There was a hole in his lower abdomen, injuring his internal organs. Urging his spiritual power to seal the wound, Lu Yi let out a light breath. The reason why he came to the tyrannical Saber Mountain Villa to take revenge was, first, to act according to 6th young Master Ye's identity, and second, because he was interested in the tyrannical saber art. But before, he didn't think too much about it. He just thought that the saber technique of this world, even if profound, might not be as profound as what he had extorted from the Wild Saber sect. But after fighting with Yi Xiong, Lu Yi found that he had underestimated the tyrannical saber technique. This saber technique was probably something extraordinary. This made him even more interested in it. Looking at the entire 9 provinces, with his current strength, there was no 8th order who could force him to use his full strength and still be injured. But Yi Xiong did it, not by his cultivation, but by his saber. Such saber technique had exceeded the scope of normal saber technique, and even gave Lu Yi a strange feeling. Saber intent. Lu Yi had always heard of this kind of illusory thing, but he had never paid much attention to it because he always thought that saber technique was just a skill to fight with the enemy. It was a very simple thing. How could it be so illusory? But Yi Xiong's saber made him feel a trace of intent. This was very strange. At this time, if he went into retreat to meditate, he might be able to make some progress in his saber technique, but this was obviously not a good time. A scream pierced through the night sky as Yi Xiong was sent flying. It was true that he had cultivated the tyrannical saber technique, but this was the first time he had used it against an enemy because with his current attainments in the saber technique, it was impossible for him to display it. Forcibly using it would only put a huge burden on his body. At this moment, on the surface, he only had injuries caused by Lu Ye's saber, but in reality his flesh and blood had been torn apart. When he used that saber strike, his essence, qi, and soul had all been exhausted. At this moment, he didn't have any strength left. He had thought that he could kill Lu Yi with that saber strike, but in the end, his cultivation wasn't enough. Not only did he fail to kill his enemy, but he was also injured by Lu Yi. In his mind, he couldn't help but recall Yi Ying's teachings, saying that his comprehension of this saber strike wasn't enough. Against weaker opponents, it wouldn't be a big problem, but against stronger opponents, not only would this saber strike be ineffective, but it would also put him in an even more disadvantageous situation. But how could he use this kind of saber technique against weaker opponents? So even though he had cultivated the tyrannical saber technique, this was the first time he had used it against an enemy. The result was that he was full of resentment. "Brother Pang, please help." Yi Xiong, who was lying on the ground, looked at Pang Wanhai. Since he couldn't take revenge himself, he could only borrow the hands of others. Yi Lu was already injured, so if Pang Wanhai helped, there would be no problem. As it should be. Pang Wanhai was in a good mood after enjoying the battle, so he readily agreed to Yi Xiong's request. He raised his hand and grasped the void, and a long saber appeared in his hand. His fighting spirit surged as he looked at Lu Yi and said, "Brat, take 3 strikes from me and I'll spare your life." Chapter 691. Pang Wanhai was a little dissatisfied with sect Master Xiong Tai Shan's previous arrangement. For a cultivator like him who had spent his entire life cultivating the saber technique, what he yearned for the most was to be able to have a great battle with a powerhouse of equal strength. It would be best if it was a powerhouse who had also cultivated the saber technique. Such a life-and-death battle might be able to bring his saber technique to the next level. In the entire Feng province, Ying was undoubtedly the best candidate. When they planned to ambush Ying, Pang Wanhai took the initiative to volunteer, but was rejected by Xiong Tai Shan. Of course, he knew why Xiong Taishan rejected him. He was afraid that he would gain something from fighting Yi Ying. Moreover, in Xiong Taishan's opinion, a secret technique like the Tyrant Saber art must have been kept by Yi Ying. Pang Wanhai was interested in the Tyrant Saber art, and so was Xiong Taishan. Whoever could kill Yi Ying would have the opportunity to obtain the secret technique. Xiong Taishan was the sect master, and Pang Wanhai was only the vice sect master. Although Pang Wanhai was dissatisfied with the sect master's words, he could only obey. But the result was that the secret technique of the Tyrant Saber art was not carried by Yi Ying. Instead, it was left in the Tyrant Saber manner and eventually fell into Pang Wanhai's hands. This was also the reason why Pang Wanhai had been staying in the Tyrant Saber manor for the past few days and did not return to the Divine Will sect. If he returned, he would definitely lose the secret technique. He wanted to study it for a few more days. By chance, he had obtained the secret technique, but it was a pity that he could not fight with a saber master like Yi Ying. But he did not expect that in addition to Yi Ying, the sixth son of the Tyrant Saber manor was also so strong. This made him feel happy. Seeing Yi Xiong defeated, Pang Wanhai raised his saber and pointed, his fighting spirit bursting. "Little brat, take 3 slashes and I'll spare your life." After seeing Lu Ye's strength with his own eyes, Pang Wanhai was not arrogant enough to think that he could kill him with 3 slashes. But Lu Yi had just fought a great battle and was injured. It was clear how much of his strength he could use, which gave him full confidence. Moreover, even if he did not die after taking 3 slashes, so what? It would be too naive of him to believe what he said. If a casual sentence could make his opponent believe it, then Yi Lu was not a threat at all. He had not used his killing move, but his verbal attack. As soon as he finished speaking, Pang Wanhai leapt forward, his spirit chi surging, his 9th order Cloud River Realm cultivation clearly displayed. Then he saw Lu Yi suddenly float backwards. A small flag had appeared in his hand at some point, and he gently waved it. Pang Wanhai's heart skipped a beat, and he immediately sensed that something was wrong. By the time he wanted to retreat, it was already too late. A layer of light that was visible to the naked eye suddenly appeared out of thin air, like a transparent bowl that covered him completely. Formation! Pang Wanhai's eyes almost popped out of their sockets. Yi Lu could actually set up a formation? Furthermore, it was obvious that he had come prepared. Oh no, when Lu Yi was waiting here, he wasn't just doing nothing. Although he was quite strong now, he wouldn't underestimate the strength of his enemies. While waiting, he had already set up many formations in the small courtyard. Yi Xiong and Pang Wanhai, these 2 weapon cultivators, knew nothing about arrays, so they didn't notice anything strange around them. When fighting Yi Xiong, Lu Yi didn't activate the power of the array because Yi Xiong didn't pose much of a threat to him. At this moment, it was perfect to deal with Pang Wanhai. Although he also wanted to fight a 9th order cultivator to test his current strength, this was obviously not a good time. Using the array to deal with him was the best choice. Pang Wanhai's reaction was extremely fast. When he realized that something was wrong, he wanted to escape, but the array had already been set up. Even if he was a 9th order cultivator, there was no way he could directly rush out of the range of the array. He slammed into the transparent light curtain, causing it to ripple. The array flag in Lu Ye's hand suddenly waved down. In the next moment, many killing arrays erupted inside the light curtain. For a moment, lightning bolts swam like snakes, golden arcs of lightning raged, and pillars of fire erupted like dragons. The spirit energy in the area was chaotic, and the momentum was terrifying. Finally, with a violent explosion, a huge flame soared into the sky. Before the trip to the 100 Array Tower, Lu Yi couldn't arrange such a compound spirit array. At the very least, there was no way to embed so many spirit arrays in such a small area. However, the trip to the 100 Array Tower had greatly increased his attainments in the Tao of Arrays, so it wasn't difficult for him to do this. The powerful impact caused the light curtain of the array to collapse. Amidst the soaring flames, a figure suddenly dashed out and fled without looking back. It was Pang Wanhai. In such a small space, he had withstood the power of so many killing arrays and had not died yet. However, compared to his majestic appearance, he could be said to be in an extremely sorry state at this moment. His clothes were ragged, his face was pitch black, and his body was covered in countless injuries. Blood was flowing out, and even his ninth-order Cloud River Realm aura was extremely weak. With such injuries, although he wasn't dead, he was still seriously injured. There was only one thought surging in his mind. This smelly brat doesn't care about martial ethics. Shouldn't a dignified weapon cultivator fight in close combat with the enemy? Why is he playing with spirit arrays? Is this something a weapon cultivator should play with? Weapon cultivators were known for their stubbornness. Such an existence had nothing to do with spirit arrays. He had never heard of the Yi family's sixth brother being proficient in the Tao of arrays. Run! Pang Wanhai hurriedly fled this place. In his current state, it was not suitable for him to fight. Although he was seriously injured, Pang Wanhai's heart was filled with only resentment, not fear. With his speed, a sixth-order cultivator would never be able to catch up to him. As long as he survived this disaster, he would repay this humiliation 1,000 times over. Just as he was thinking this though, he suddenly felt a chill run down his spine as he perceived a sharp aura approaching him at an extremely fast speed. Pang Wanhai turned his head and his pupils shrank. How is this possible? How can this sixth master Yi be so fast? Also, what's with that pair of fiery red wings? Before Pang Wanhai could figure out what was going on, a bright saber light spread out in his field of vision. Pang Wanhai grit his teeth and turned around to raise his saber. In a violent collision, Lu Ye's pursuing figure paused slightly while Pang Wanhai's body fell like a meteor from the sky. Lu Ye's wings flapped behind him and followed him like a shadow. I'm determined to kill him. After a short while, Lu Yi walked out of the ruins, gently swinging the mountain saber in his hand before sheathing it. Behind him, Pang Wanhai was half kneeling on the ground, his eyes still filled with shock and disbelief. The aura on his body had completely dissipated. He had never imagined that he would die here. Not long ago, he had been excitedly comprehending the tyrant saber technique. In a small courtyard, inside a protective array, a young girl with a figure somewhat similar to Yi Luli stood. Although her face was pale, her eyes were bright. Thanks to the protective array, the aftermath of the previous battle had not hurt her. Even if the house she was in collapsed, it was blocked by the protective array's light curtain. She had never cultivated before, so she did not know how dangerous the previous battle had been, but she had seen Lu Yi beat Yi Xiong like a dead dog and saw the majestic Pang Wanhai flee, his fate unknown. It turns out that the sixth young master is so powerful. The thick dark clouds in the sky dispersed and the bright moonlight poured down, just like the young girl's mood at the moment. No one would bully her again. The battle here had erupted suddenly and ended quickly. The battle between Lu Yi and Yi Xiong had only lasted for 20 breaths of time, and Pang Wanhai had been killed in about the same time. Therefore, only now did the other cultivators in the villa hear the commotion and come over. They looked up and saw Pang Wanhai's kneeling corpse and Yi Xiong, who was lying on the ground like a dead dog, his essence, qi, and spirit drained, as if he had suddenly aged many years. They also saw a figure that should not have appeared here. Sixth young master. Someone murmured. These cultivators who had rushed over could be considered the disciples of the Tyrant Saber Villa. Although the Tyrant Saber Villa was a family-like force, the Yi family alone could not support such a huge family business, so Yi Ying and Yi Xiong had taken in many disciples over the years. When the Tyrant Saber Villa had been breached, many people had died in battle, some had fled, and many had survived. Those who remained in the Tyrant Saber Villa were basically those who obeyed Yi Xiong. However, although these people had cultivation, only a few of them were in the Cloud River realm, and their cultivation was not high. At this moment, these disciples who had rushed over looked at Lu Yi and Yi Xiong lying on the ground with complicated expressions. When the Tyrant Saber Villa had been breached, many of them did not know what had happened. Only when the dust had settled did they realize something. In any case, colluding with outsiders was not something to be proud of. In these few days, many of the surviving disciples had been suffering in their hearts, and only felt that the road ahead was bleak. The fact that something like this had happened tonight made them feel even more confused. Kill him. A weak voice sounded. It was Yi Xiong lying on the ground. Kill him quickly. Yi Xiong had used all his strength to wield the tyrant saber. At this moment he was truly a lamp without oil. Pang Wanhai, who he had relied on, was also dead. If he wanted to live, he could only rely on these disciples. Although these disciples were not outstanding, if they swarmed together, they might have a chance. No one moved. Not to mention that Pang Wanhai's death had shocked them greatly. Lu Ye's identity as the sixth young master made them unable to do anything. After a while, a disciple clasped his fists and bowed to Lu Yi. "Sixth young master, take care." Saying so, he turned around and left. Attacking Lu Yi was absolutely impossible, but it was not good for him to stay. After thinking about it, he decided to leave. After the Tyrant Saber Villa had experienced such an incident, it was hard to say whether the Tyrant Saber Villa would still exist in the Feng province in the future. Some people took the lead while others followed. The hesitant disciples saw that Lu Yi did not have the slightest intention to persuade them to stay. They knew that even if they stayed, they would not be welcomed in the future, so they all left. In a moment, the cultivators who had come here had all left. Only Yi Xiong's unwilling and powerless roar echoed in the night sky. To be continued. Chapter 692. Lu Yi stepped forward, looking down at Yi Xiong from above. Dan Mo's eyes finally made Yi Xiong panic. "Yi Lu, I'm your second uncle. You can't kill me. You're still young. You don't want to live with the crime of killing your own family, do you?" Yi Xiong struggled to speak. Even at this time, he still had the instinct to live. The only response he got was a flash of blade light. "Yi Lu's second uncle was related to me, Lu Yi." Yi Xiong died. His eyes widened, as if he didn't expect his nephew to act so decisively. In the middle of the night, the tyrannical Saber Manor was in chaos. The news of Pang Wanhai and Yi Xiong's death spread quickly. The remaining disciples left one after another. Yi Xiong's wives and concubines also scattered, afraid that Lu Yi would come and kill them. Lu Yi was not in the mood. Although he had to act according to Yi Lu's identity, killing Yi Xiong and Yi Lang was enough. As for Yi Xiong's wives and concubines, most of them were ordinary people who had never cultivated. A few of them were cultivators, but their cultivation was not very high. Lu Yi came in front of the girl and removed the protective array. He said, "You should go too. Live a good life. If there's anything you like in the manor, just take it." After today, the tyrannical Saber Manor would no longer exist in Feng province. Lu Yi didn't care much about the properties in the manor. Those things were useful to ordinary people, but not to cultivators. The girl knelt in front of Lu Yi and kowtowed 3 times, then hurriedly left. Lu Yi raised his hand and touched the battlefield imprint, sending a message to. The sky was getting brighter. Lu Yi was the only one left in the manor. In the center of the Saber Lake, there was a small island with a few simple wooden houses. In front of the houses was a field of green bamboo. Compared to the solemn atmosphere of the tyrannical Saber Manor, it seemed out of place. Lu Yi moved a chair and sat in front of a wooden house, playing with a black stone in his hand. His eyes flashed with contemplation. Even with his vision, he couldn't tell what this black stone was made of. It was the secret inheritance of the tyrannical saber art. It was an opportunity that Ying had obtained in his early years. Lu Yi didn't expect to get it so easily. The main reason why he came to the tyrannical saber villa to take revenge was because of the tyrannical saber art. However, he didn't have much hope because Yi Xiong had colluded with the Divine Will sect. If there was anything good, it would have been taken away by the Divine Will sect, especially the secret inheritance of the tyrannical saber art. It was impossible to leave it in the tyrannical saber villa. He had originally thought that he would only have a chance to retrieve the secret manual after he had dealt with the Divine Will sect. Unexpectedly, he actually found this item in Pang Wanhai's storage pouch. This was truly an unexpected surprise. How could he have known that this secret manual was also an unexpected surprise for Pang Wanhai? The reason he had stayed at the domineering Saber Manor instead of returning to the Divine Will sect was because he wanted to comprehend the domineering saber art for a few more days. But in the end, he had lost his life. It could only be said that there was bound to be something in life, and there was no need to force it. This secret manual was not the only thing he had gained. Ying had established the tyrannical saber villa many years ago and had collected many things about the saber art. Among them, there was no lack of the insights of masters. They were all placed in the library of the tyrannical saber villa. Now, they were all in Lu Ye's storage pouch. He had casually checked before and found that his gains were much more abundant than he had imagined. This world was limited by the heavens and earth. The upper limit of a cultivator's cultivation was the Cloud River realm. However, it was also because of this reason that cultivators would shift the focus of their cultivation to polishing their skills when they could no longer improve their cultivation. This led to a phenomenon. The Cloud River realm cultivators of this world were generally stronger than the cultivators of the 9 continents in terms of fighting skills. This was especially true for the Cloud River realm 9th order cultivators. No one knew what kind of foundation they had unless it was a life or death battle. Pang Wanhai's death was actually a little sullen. He had judged Lu Ye's ability based on his inherent knowledge, but in the end he had been defeated by the spirit array that Lu Yi had set up in advance. Who would have thought that a weapon cultivator who used the saber would also be proficient in spirit arrays? If it had really been a life or death battle, it would have been a bitter one. The things in the library were not only the saber art insights of Cloud River realm cultivators. In the early years of the Soaring Dragon realm, there were Spirit Sea realm cultivators. Although hundreds of years had passed, many things were still passed down. The secret manual of the tyrannical saber art, the gains in the library. Just these things alone made this trip worthwhile for Lu Yi. And these things were all things that he longed for in the 9 continents but could not obtain. In the sky, a stream of light pierced through the air and soon landed in front of him, revealing 2 figures with similar figures. It was Yi and Yi Lioli. Last night, after dealing with Yi Xiong, Lu Yi sent a message to. However, Yi Lioli was still unconscious at that time, so Yi did not disturb her. It was not until Yi Lioli woke up that Yi brought her over. After a night of rest, Yi Lioli's spirit had recovered a lot. 6th brother. Yi Lioli called out softly and looked around. She had built the wooden house on the island with her own hands. It was also her favorite place. In the entire tyrannical Saber Mountain Villa, except for her, no one could come here. It was a familiar place, a familiar scenery, but many familiar figures were no longer there. The little girl was secretly sad. Yi Xiong is dead. There was also a 9th order cultivator from the Divine Will sect. I don't know his name, but I killed them all, Lu Yi said. Yi Lioli did not know how her 6th brother did such a thing, but the death of her enemies was undoubtedly something to be happy about. The little girl's nose twitched, her eyes reddened, and tears rolled down her cheeks. The culprit this time was Yi Xiong. He was the one who leaked Yi, our father's whereabouts, and attracted the Divine Will sect to surround and kill him. Lu Ye's current identity was 6th brother Yi, but when he called someone else father, Lu Yi still could not breathe properly. Rest well first. I'll think of a way to get revenge later. Yi Lioli shook her head, tears streaming down her face. It's enough, 6th brother. All her family members were dead, and only 6th brother was left. The main culprit had been executed, and her revenge had been avenged. She didn't want to see 6th brother go up against the Divine Will sect again. If something were to happen to 6th brother, then she would really be all alone. Lu Yi naturally did not care. He had already gotten what he wanted, and since Yi Lioli said so, he just went along with it, nodding lightly. Rest first. You haven't rested well these past few days. Although he said so, Lu Yi knew that even if he did not go to the Divine Will sect, they would still come looking for him. After all, Pang Wanhai had died here. The death of a 9th order cultivator was a huge blow to the Divine Will sect. No matter what, the Divine Will sect would respond. Unless he took Yi Lioli away from Feng province and left the scope of the Divine Will sect's influence. But right now, he was eager to comprehend his gains, so how could he be willing to run around and tire himself? The Divine Will sect was strong. If he took the initiative to attack them, he might not have a chance of winning, but if they dared to come, he would not have a good ending. Array cultivators were best at defending against enemies. As long as they were given enough time and space, they could form an army by themselves. Yi Lioli obeyed his instructions and went to rest in a wooden house. Lu Yi asked Yi to stay behind and look after her, while he began to arrange a large spirit array around the island. In the Cloud River battlefield, he was targeted by the myriad demon ridge side, but he was still safe and sound. No matter how strong the Divine Will sect was, it was not stronger than a large camp. While he was busy here, the Divine Will sect received some news. Many people left the tyrannical Saber Mountain Villa that day, so all kinds of news naturally spread. The changes in the tyrannical Saber Mountain Villa had already attracted the attention of the Feng Province's cultivation world. After all, the tyrannical Saber Mountain Villa was a big force. What happened after that was even more shocking. Sixth young Master Yi went back to the tyrannical Saber Mountain Villa alone, killed Yi Xiong and Pang Wanhai, and avenged the blood feud with his own strength. If not for the fact that more than one person spread the news, no one would have believed it. Yi Xiong was only an 8th order cultivator, but who was Pang Wanhai? He was the Divine Will sect's vice sect master, a 9th order cultivator, while Yi Lu was only a 6th order cultivator. How could he kill those two? No one knew the specific details of the battle, but the result was there, so people had no choice but to believe it. Unlike the cultivators who took it as idle gossip, the Divine Will sect's reaction was much more intense. The vice sect master died in the tyrannical Saber Mountain Villa. Even if it was rumored that Yi Lu had the ability to kill a 9th order cultivator, the Divine Will sect would not let it go so easily. Over the past few days, many Divine Will sect cultivators were ordered to sneak into the tyrannical Saber Mountain Villa to find out what happened. However, the entire tyrannical Saber Mountain Villa was like a bottomless abyss, and all the cultivators who entered were missing. Even an 8th order elder of the Divine Will sect was among them. This time, the Divine Will sect was a little shocked. They secretly speculated that there might be some mysterious master behind Yi Lu. Otherwise, how could a 6th order cultivator do such a thing? Perhaps the one who killed Yi Xiong and Pang Wanhai was also the mysterious master hiding behind Yi Lu? After losing some people, the Divine Will sect did not dare to act rashly. They only left some people to monitor the tyrannical Saber Mountain Villa from afar. The unknown was the most terrifying enemy. The Divine Will sect dared to attack Yi Ying and the tyrannical Saber Mountain Villa because the tyrannical Saber Mountain Villa's full strength was in the open. But now, the entire tyrannical Saber Mountain Villa seemed to be wrapped in a layer of fog. Who would dare to act rashly before finding out the truth? This saved Lu Yi a lot of trouble. The reason why the Divine Will sect cultivators who sneaked in were nowhere to be found was because they had fallen into the spirit array. No one in the entire Soaring Dragon realm would be able to see through the formation he had set up. Those who fell into the formation would not have a good ending, not to mention the disciples of the Divine Will sect. Even the sect master of the Divine Will sect would not be able to see through it. In the past few days, he was not in a hurry to cultivate the tyrannical saber art, nor did he comprehend the many saber techniques he had obtained from the library. He had been meditating calmly to relieve the pressure on his soul. To be continued. Chapter 693. The gift he had received from the 100 Formation Pagoda was simply too great. After leaving the pagoda, his spirit had been constantly under immense pressure. He had originally planned to find a secluded place after leaving the 100 Formation Pagoda, or go into seclusion at the Tianji Business Alliance. He had not expected to suddenly come to the Soaring Dragon realm. After that, he was hunted down, and then came to the tyrannical Saber Mountain Manor to seek revenge. Only now did he barely manage to settle down. The gift from the 100 Formation Pagoda was not so easy to digest. The gift he had received from the 100 Formation Pagoda in the Sky Expanse sect had taken 1 or 2 years to digest. The gift he had received from the 100 Formation Pagoda in the Cloudy River battlefield was more than 10 times greater than the previous one. However, it would not take 10 times longer. Firstly, Lu Ye's spirit was now much stronger than before. Secondly, his cultivation in the Tao of Formations could not be mentioned in the same breath as before. However, it was still not something that could be completed in a short period of time. Lu Yi did not need to digest the entire gift. He only needed to digest a part of it so that his spirit would not be so pressured. He rarely meditated like this. Occasionally he would try it out. It was a different experience. 5 days later, in the wooden house he was staying in, Lu Yi slowly opened his eyes. There was a faint glimmer in his eyes. After 5 days of comprehension and sorting out, the pressure on his spirit no longer existed. However, the more he comprehended, the more he could feel the vastness of the gift. After his trip to the Sky Expanse sect, Lu Yi had been curious about one thing. Who had created the 100 Formation Pagoda? Why did it have such a miraculous effect? How was it divided into 3 parts? Such a treasure would definitely exceed the knowledge of the cultivation world of the 9 prefectures. If it was in its complete state, what would it be like? It was a pity that there were only 2 parts of the 100 Formation Pagoda in the cultivation world of the 9 prefectures. The location of the 3rd part was unknown. There were many unrecognized secrets in the cultivation world of the 9 prefectures. Not to mention Lu Yi, who was only at the Cloud River tier. Could even those at the Divine Sea tier know everything? Perhaps even they could not see the truth of the 100 Formation Pagoda. The pressure on his soul had been relieved for the time being, but it would take some time for him to completely digest the enormous gift. This matter could not be rushed, and he would slowly digest it when he had the time in the future. Lu Yi had a faint feeling that if he could digest all the benefits he had obtained this time, then his attainments in Array Dao might not be the best in the world, but at least in the entire 9 regions, he would be at the top. This wasn't him being arrogant, but he was certain of one thing. There had never been an array cultivator in the 9 continents who had obtained such great benefits from the 100 Formation Pagoda like him. But then again, although the 100 Formation Pagoda's gift could greatly increase Lu Yi's attainments in Array Dao in a short period of time, it was still a kind of enlightenment that did not belong to him. If there was a day when he could obtain the pagoda and transcend the pagoda, then he would be able to walk his own path. Of course, that was a matter for a long time to come. Lu Yi only had a vague idea of what to do in the near future. For now, he wasn't qualified to do so. Only after the pressure on his soul had been relieved did Lu Yi take out the unknown black stone from his storage space. The black stone was the size of an egg and completely black. At first glance, it looked inconspicuous, but upon closer inspection, one would realize that the black stone was like a black hole that could even swallow one's sight. The secret inheritance of the tyrannical saber art. It was impossible to verify where Ying had obtained the black stone. There were only rumors that he had obtained it from an ancient ruin. It was also because of this black stone that Yi Ying had created the tyrannical saber art and the tyrannical saber mountain villa. It could be said that this small black stone was the root of the tyrannical saber mountain villa. The tyrannical saber mountain villa had indeed been destroyed, and there would be no tyrannical saber mountain villa in the future. However, as long as this black stone existed, the tyrannical saber art would not be lost. Lu Yi stared at the black stone. Even with his powerful soul, he was slightly shaken. Faintly, he felt as if his entire body was about to be sucked into the darkness. He urged his spiritual energy and poured it into the black stone. In an instant, the small black stone seemed to have become a bottomless pit, constantly swallowing Lu Yi's spiritual energy. The darkness on the surface of the black stone became deeper and deeper, as if it was about to materialize and flow out of the stone. Until a certain moment, a black fog visible to the naked eye surged out. The black fog seemed to have a mind of its own as it rolled back and wrapped around Lu Yi. Lu Yi did not panic. When he had killed Pang Wanhai and waited here for Yi and Yilioli, he had urged this black stone, so he knew that this was a normal phenomenon. Wrapped in the black fog, Lu Yi instantly lost all perception of his surroundings, as if he had entered another world. This world was gray and hazy. As far as the eye could see, 3 indistinct figures could be seen in front of him. Although the faces of the figures could not be seen clearly, judging from the outlines, these 3 figures should be the same person. However, they corresponded to the 3 states of a person's life. The figure on the left was full of vitality and high spirits. The figure in the middle was mature and steady, like a mountain. The figure on the right had a long beard that reached his chest. Although his figure was slightly stooped, his aura was as deep as the sea and as vast as the starry sky. Youth, middle-aged, old. Lu Yi vaguely guessed that this should be the mark left by the creator of the tyrant saber art in the black stone to pass on his saber art. Each figure corresponded to a move of the tyrant saber. 3 figures meant that the tyrant saber had 3 moves. This was undoubtedly an extremely brilliant method of inheritance. Compared to using jade slips or books to record, it was much more intuitive. However, this method was not something that just anyone could do. At the very least, Lu Yi had never heard of any divine sea realm cultivator in the 9 provinces who could do this. Perhaps he was ignorant, or perhaps this was not a divine sea realm cultivator's method. The last time Lu Yi came here, he had stimulated the figure of the youth on the far left. However, in just 3 breaths, he had retreated from here. This time, he suddenly had the idea to try the other 2 figures. As for how to stimulate them, it was not a troublesome matter. After all, this was only an inheritance. The spiritual energy he poured into the black stone was the key to opening this inheritance. However, just as Lu Yi was about to do so, a cold feeling suddenly swept through his body. It was as if an invisible beast had stretched out its tongue and licked his divine soul. Lu Yi suddenly froze, and a trace of understanding appeared in the depths of his heart. With his current strength, he could not rashly stimulate the figures of the middle-aged and the old man. Otherwise, he would really die here. A strong divine soul not only gave birth to a strong perception, but also a premonition of danger. Lu Yi suddenly understood. No wonder even Ying had never used the 2nd and 3rd moves of the tyrant saber. The world only knew that he did not need to use these 2 moves against enemies, but in fact he had never cultivated them. Because Lu Yi was sure that with Yi Ying's foundation, it was not enough to stimulate the figures of the middle-aged and the old man, unless he wanted to die. This made Lu Yi laugh involuntarily. However, this also proved the greatness of the tyrant saber from another perspective. With just 1 move of the tyrant saber, Ying had such an achievement. If he could really learn the 2nd and 3rd moves, he would be invincible in the entire soaring dragon realm. Since he could not rashly stimulate the figures of the middle-aged and the old man, Lu Yi once again turned his gaze to the figure of the youth on the left. As a cultivator, it was necessary to maintain enough curiosity, but sometimes one also needed to act according to one's ability. Otherwise, one would be courting death. With a thought, the youth's figure also moved. A long saber had appeared in his hand at some unknown time. The long saber was the same as his figure, pitch black, and did not seem to be a real thing. The youth's figure slightly squatted down, both hands flat, the long saber horizontally in front of his eyes, and the other hand gently brushed the blade. This posture was the same as Yi Xiong's when he used the tyrant saber technique. Although it looked similar, the youth's movement made Lu Yi feel as if a sleeping dragon had suddenly awoken. It was as if there was a huge dragon head peeking out from its dragon's lair, overlooking all living things. Under the boundless pressure, not only could Lu Ye's body not move, even his thoughts were almost stagnant. The power of Yi Xiong's attack that day, if it had even a fraction of this youth's figure, Lu Yi would have died 100 times over. It seemed like an instant, but also like a million years. The youth's saber. It was an ordinary straight stab, slow. Such a saber, even an ordinary person who had never cultivated could see it clearly. However, as the long saber moved forward, an unbelievable scene appeared. In the darkness, it was as if the dark clouds had dispersed, revealing countless twinkling stars in the sky. Each of those stars was the flickering light of the saber. The curtain of stars fell, and the overwhelming starlight followed the long saber, surging towards Lu Yi and wrapping him up. The first move of the tyrant saber, stars. When Yi Xiong had used this move, Lu Yi had also had this illusion, but he had quickly gotten rid of it. But at this moment, after the young man had used this move, he couldn't get rid of it no matter how hard he tried. It was as if countless stars were really falling from the sky, wrapping the whole curtain of the sky and smashing towards him. Under such heavenly power, who could block it? Perhaps an entire domain would be destroyed. Lu Ye's spirit soul suffered a great deal of pain in an instant, causing him to groan uncontrollably. It felt as if countless sharp knives were cutting his spirit soul. But he was unwilling to even blink, staring at the youth's movements. He opened his mind, allowing his soul to feel the thousands of kinds of pain, carefully perceiving the mysteries of this saber move. Every saber light that cut into Lu Ye's body gave him a new level of enlightenment. Every moment was stretched to the limit, and it seemed like an eternity, but in reality it was only 5 breaths. The starlight in the sky shattered, and the surrounding darkness was swept away. The scene of the wooden house appeared in Lu Ye's vision again. Lu Ye gasped for breath, as if he was drowning, his clothes soaked with sweat. Although he knew that what he experienced in that environment was not real, and was just a vision caused by the inheritance, but it was too real, so real that it was as if he had really been buried under the stars. To be continued. Chapter 694. Death was no stranger to Lu Ye. Ever since he obtained the breath fruit core, he had died countless times in the mirage realm. He had long been able to remain calm. Because he knew that death in the mirage realm was not real, he could be fearless. But in the environment where he stimulated the tyrant saber secret art, when the young man attacked, Lu Ye felt the aura of death was too real. Even if he had died countless times in the mirage realm, he could not help but feel terrified. 3 breaths. He only lasted for 3 breaths of time before his mind withdrew from the black stone. This did not mean that he could really hold on for 3 breaths of time under the power of the saber. If such a saber was really used in the real world, he would have died the moment the saber light flashed. The reason Yangming could last for 3 breaths was mainly because it was a method of inheritance. Every time the saber light slashed his body, the many mysteries of the tyrant saber would surge in his mind, allowing him to have a clearer understanding of the saber's mysteries. Different from the 100 Formation Tower's rude gift of enlightenment, this kind of inheritance was more detailed. The length of time one could hold on should be related to the strength of one's soul. The stronger one's soul, the longer one could hold on and the greater the benefits one could obtain. Lu Ye could hold on for 3 breaths of time, but he estimated that Ying could not hold on for that long. This was indeed the case. When Yi Ying first obtained this tyrant saber's secret art, he couldn't even last a single moment. Even after breaking through to the Cloud River 9th Order, after accumulating his strength over the years, he could only last 2 breaths. As for Pang Wanhai, he could not even hold on for 1 breath of time. Lu Ye could hold on for 3 breaths of time on his first try, which was a very good performance. In the inexplicable space of the inheritance, Lu Ye could actually move, but the moment the young man attacked, Lu Ye had no room to resist. He could only stand in place obediently and bear the power of the tyrant saber. He had a faint feeling that when he could block that move of the tyrant saber, he would be considered to have cultivated the tyrant saber to the great perfection realm. Only then would he be qualified to touch the second move of the tyrant saber. If the first tyrant saber was so powerful, what would the second tyrant saber be like? He could not help but be fascinated. However, rice had to be eaten 1 bite at a time, and the road had to be taken step by step. Lu Ye still understood this truth. This was the real saber art. Compared to this, what Lu Ye had cultivated before was at most some special techniques, including his self-created flash and consecutive slashes. Those were just some techniques used against enemies. In front of such a saber technique, it was like the brilliance of a firefly compared to the bright moon. It was not worth mentioning. But then again, the cultivation of the person who left behind the tyrant saber's secret manual was unfathomably high. How long had Lu Ye cultivated? If he was given enough time, it was not impossible for him to grow to this level or even surpass it. Therefore, he would not belittle himself. It was only right to revere the strong. Working hard was the right way to go. Moreover, looking at it now, the tyrant saber first style Yi Xiong had displayed wasn't even close to the real tyrant saber. Even so, it had made Lu Ye feel a sense of crisis, and he had even been injured. Lu Ye didn't know how high Yi Ying's mastery of this technique was, but it should be stronger than Yi Xiong's. As for how much stronger, it was hard to tell. He focused his mind and calmed his heart to comprehend. In the inheritance space, every slash of the saber was the transmission of the inheritance. It was the teaching of countless years. Just like now, Ying was dead, and the Tyrant Saber Mountain Villa was empty. From now on, there would be no Tyrant Saber Mountain Villa, but the inheritance of the Tyrant Saber art was not cut off. The ingenuity of the Tyrant Saber art was not only limited to the 3 styles, but also the many concepts of this saber art were perfectly contained in the saber art. Yi Ying was able to establish the Tyrant Saber Mountain Villa with the Tyrant Saber first style because he had comprehended and sorted out many things that belonged to him. What Lu Yi needed to do now was to walk the path Yi Ying had walked in the past. Sort out, summarize, and comprehend. It had to be said that this saber art was very compatible with his temperament. When he faced enemies, he was fearless and invincible. Even cultivators with higher cultivation than him would often feel a great sense of oppression. The Tyrant Saber art required this kind of aggressiveness to display the essence of this saber art. After sitting upright for a long time, Lu Yi suddenly stood up and walked out of the door. He came to an open area on the island in the middle of the lake, drew the mountain pan saber from his waist, and gently waved it. His movements were not fast and could be said to be very slow. There was no special power when he waved the saber, and his performance was like that of a beginner. There was nothing praiseworthy about it. But the miraculous thing was that his aura gradually became sharp, almost like a long saber that was about to be unsheathed. The aura of man and saber gradually merged into one. The fusion of man and saber. This was an accomplishment that Lu Yi had achieved long ago when he had advanced to the Cloud River tier. Strictly speaking, a cultivator's spirit tool was an extension of their own body, especially for a weapon cultivator. The reason why Lu Yi did not change his spirit tool when he had advanced to the Cloud River tier, and instead chose to upgrade the Mountain Pan Saber was because the Mountain Pan Saber had accompanied him through almost the entire Spirit Stream tier. He was already familiar with the Mountain Pan Saber, and correspondingly, the saber was also familiar with him. If he were to rashly change to another spirit tool, even if the quality was better, it might not be able to let Lu Yi display his full strength, unless he was willing to spend a lot of time nourishing it. The process of cultivators refining spirit tools was not only to let the spirit tool display more power, but also to strengthen the connection between the cultivator and the spirit tool, so that the cultivator could wield it more freely. The Mountain Pan Saber had been with Lu Yi since he had reached the 5th Order Spirit Stream tier. To Lu Yi, it was a part of his body. But in the end, it was still just a spirit tool. But at this moment, the aura of man and saber were gradually synchronizing. If one did not look with the naked eye, it would be impossible to distinguish the difference between the two. As he waved his saber, Lu Yi suddenly lowered his waist and twisted his body, thrusting his saber forward. A cold light blossomed on the pitch-black saber, and the sound of cracking cloth could be heard. A bright saber mark flashed across the air. A trace of paleness flashed across Lu Ye's face, but he quickly calmed down. He stood in place, thinking about the gains and losses of his saber. After a while, he slowly shook his head. Tyrannical first form, starry sky. Strictly speaking, it was a straight stab. Every ray of starlight that fell from the sky was a flickering saber light. Therefore, although this saber seemed to be just one saber strike, it was actually countless sabers. In order to completely unleash such a saber strike, a cultivator needed to have absolute control over their saber. Only then could they instantly unleash a saber light that was like the twinkling stars. Lu Ye's saber strike was not inferior to Yi Xiong's in terms of pure power, but in terms of the tyrannical saber art itself, it was inferior. After all, no matter what, Yi Xiong had cultivated the tyrannical saber art for a long time, while Lu Yi had only cultivated it for a short time. Not enough, far from enough. Lu Yi closed his eyes again and continued to wield his saber. Although the saber strike just now had consumed a lot of his strength, it was still within an acceptable range. He would not be like Yi Xiong, who had been slaughtered after using the tyrannical saber art. Of course, this was also related to the fact that Lu Yi had not truly displayed the starry sky. With such a saber technique, even if he did not cultivate it to the grand accomplishment stage, Lu Yi felt that he would be invincible in the Cloud River realm. Coupled with his current foundation, he could even kill a 9th Order cultivator with a single strike. He had not forgotten his situation in the Cloud River battlefield, where he was like a rat that everyone wanted to beat up. A sealed world was a sealed world, and there would always be a time when he had to leave. If he could cultivate the tyrannical saber art to the minor accomplishment stage here, he would definitely be able to give the cultivators of Myriad Demons Ridge a pleasant surprise when he returned to the Cloud River battlefield. Xia Liang and Tan Xing were like ghosts that would not disperse. Wherever he went, he could see their shadows. Lu Yi had long wanted to kill these two dogs. There were many things that he needed to comprehend. The huge gift of the 100 Formation Pagoda needed to be comprehended, and the tyrannical saber art also needed to be comprehended. However, this did not hinder Lu Ye's cultivation. Every day, he ate a lot of spirit pills and comprehended all kinds of mysteries. His days were unprecedentedly fulfilling. When he was in the mood, he would practice his saber in the open space in the center of the island. In order to learn the tyrannical saber art faster, Lu Yi even used the soul-cleansing water. The tyrannical saber's saber light in the inheritance space also consumed a lot of his soul. When Yi Ying and Yi Xiong cultivated the tyrannical saber art before, they could only comprehend it once every half a month or even a month. Otherwise, if they consumed too much soul strength in a short period of time, there would definitely be repercussions. Lu Yi did not have such concerns. He had a lot of soul water. Although he used some in the 100 Formation Pagoda, he still had a lot left. When his soul was tired, he would use the soul water to nourish it. On average, he could comprehend it 4 or 5 times a day, which was almost equivalent to the Ying brothers' results in a few months. In this way, Lu Ye's attainments in the tyrannical saber art could be said to have advanced by leaps and bounds. His cultivation did not increase by much, but in terms of saber art, Lu Yi was growing at an unimaginable speed. Lu Yi also studied some of the saber art cultivation notes from the library. Compared to the tyrannical saber art, these notes were naturally not much. However, it was undeniable that these things were good things for Lu Yi. They were also in line with his current attainments. During the half a month in the tyrannical saber mountain villa, he was like a bottomless abyss, swallowing everything he could absorb into his body. His saber art had made great progress. If he were to stand in front of him half a month ago, Lu Yi was even confident that he could finish the battle in 10 strikes. While he was cultivating crazily, Yi Liuli also gradually walked out of the haze. It was mainly because of Yi and Hooper accompanying her every day. Yi also knew that this was a secret realm. Everything she experienced here was very likely to have happened in this world in the past. It was just that it was reproduced by some inexplicable method. Yi Liuli might not even exist. However, Yi could not help but feel pity for this little girl who was about the same age and figure as her. Perhaps it had something to do with her. The starting point of Yi's memories was when she was transformed into a despondent spirit by Hu Po. Before that, she had no idea who she was or where she came from. With Hu Po and Lu Yi, they were her only 2 family members. How could the current Yi Liuli not be the same? End of chapter. Chapter 695. Lu Yi. An exclamation suddenly rang out from the wooden house. Lu Yi, who was immersed in practicing saber techniques at the center of the island, snapped out of his trance and turned to look in the direction of the sound. He had never heard Yi sound so flustered before, which made his heart skip a beat. With a flash, he appeared in the wooden house. Looking over, he saw Yi supporting Yi Liuli in a panic. The latter had already fallen into a coma. Her face was as pale as a sheet, and her body was convulsing uncontrollably, as if she was suffering from hysteria. After spending half a month together, Yi and Yi Liuli's relationship had improved rapidly. Lu Yi was usually busy comprehending saber techniques and the 100 Formation Pagoda's gift, so he had no time to accompany them. The 2 of them played together to pass the time. In the depths of her heart, Yi had already regarded Yi Liuli as one of her few friends. Sometimes, she even fantasized about how great it would be if she could bring her out of this mystic realm. But she knew that was impossible. Just now, the 2 of them had been talking and laughing together, but in the blink of an eye, Yi Liuli had suddenly become like this. It really frightened her. She had never encountered such a thing before. Lu Yi stepped forward and took the convulsing Yi Lioli from Yi's hands. The moment he touched her, he frowned. He had thought that Yi Lioli was suffering from hysteria, but it didn't seem like it because Yi Lioli's body was alternating between hot and cold. One had to know that although this little girl's cultivation wasn't very high, she was still at the Cloud River tier. He suddenly remembered something. Yi Lioli had had a similar problem since she was young. She would act up from time to time, and the intervals were uncertain. Sometimes she wouldn't act up for a few years, and sometimes she would act up once every few months. This information had mysteriously appeared in his mind when he entered this mystic realm. It should be a trick of Tianji. He hurriedly laid Yi Lioli flat on the bed and had Yi press down on her limbs. He pinched Yi Lioli's mouth with one hand to prevent her from biting her own tongue, and used the other hand to remove the storage bag from Yi Lioli's waist. If he remembered correctly, there should be medicine in Yi Lioli's storage bag. There was a restriction on the storage bag, but for the current Lu Yi, it was useless. With just a thought, the restriction lock was opened and he quickly found a wooden box. He opened the box and took out a pill about the size of a cherry. He stuffed it into Yi Lioli's mouth and used his spiritual energy to help her swallow it. After the effects of the medicine dissolved, Yi Lioli's condition slowly improved. However, there was still no trace of blood on her pale face. She was frighteningly cold, like a piece of ice that wouldn't melt even after 10,000 years. What happened to her? He asked worriedly. It's an old ailment that I've had since I was young, Lu Yi replied, her gaze fixed on Yi Lioli. Although her symptoms had improved, there was something wrong with her aura. Lu Yi raised his hand and placed it on her wrist. His spiritual energy wandered as he carefully examined her. Although he was not a medical cultivator, nor had he cultivated anything related to medical cultivation, a simple investigation was not a problem for him. With this investigation, he really did feel something abnormal. He raised his hand and turned Yi Lioli over so that her back was facing him. Then he used his fingers like a sword and used his spiritual energy to open a hole in her clothes. The clothes were torn open, and the girl's snow-white back came into view. However, Lu Ye's brows furrowed tightly. Because in that snow-white skin, there was a hideous mark. At first glance, it looked like a brown centipede. This was a birthmark. Ever since Yi Lioli was born, she had such a birthmark on her back. However, only Yi Ying and his wife knew about this. No matter what, having such a birthmark on a woman's body would affect her beauty, even if it was on her back. If it was just a simple birthmark, it would be fine. The key was that this birthmark was squirming violently at this moment, as if something was about to break out of it. Ah! He covered her mouth and exclaimed. Lu Yi pointed a finger at the squirming birthmark. His spiritual energy and thoughts surged together. His brows furrowed even more. When he saw that scene just now, he originally thought that something foreign had entered Yi Lioli's body. However, after careful investigation, he found that there was nothing abnormal in her body at all. The squirming of the birthmark was not caused by an external force. Instead, it seemed that the birthmark was alive. There was something strange about it. However, what could be confirmed now was that Yi Lioli's abnormality should be caused by the change in the birthmark. It could even be said that the problem she had since she was young originated from this. After a moment of careful investigation, Lu Yi really couldn't find anything abnormal. Only then did he stop. If only Hua Ci was here. With her attainments in medical cultivation, she might be able to detect something. The squirming of the birthmark gradually calmed down. At the same time, the cold aura on Yi Lioli's body also slowly dissipated. A trace of color gradually returned to her face. The crisis had passed. It should be the effect of that pill. Help her change her clothes, Lu Yi said and walked out of the door. He didn't continue practicing his saber. Instead, he stood not far away and pondered. Yi Lioli's abnormality reminded him of some messy information. For example, this was an old problem Yi Lioli had since she was young. For example, there was medicine in Yi Lioli's storage bag. Another example was Medical Valley, Little Fairy Doctor. These were all information he obtained when he entered this arcane realm. However, he didn't think of it before. Yi Liuli's outburst became the opportunity for him to recall these things. The pills in Yi Liuli's storage bag naturally couldn't have come from nowhere. They came from Medical Valley, from Little Fairy Doctor. The Soaring Dragon Realm also had a faction of medical cultivators, and Medical Valley's Little Fairy Doctor was the most famous and powerful medical cultivator in the entire Soaring Dragon Realm. When Yi Liuli was young, Ying once took her to Medical Valley to treat her illness. The pills were something he brought back from Medical Valley. However, there weren't many of them. Because these things weren't easy to preserve, Ying had to go to Medical Valley every few years to get new medicine. The last time he left tyrannical Saber Mountain Villa, it was to get medicine for Yi Liuli. In the end, his whereabouts were leaked by Yi Xiong, and in the end, he was surrounded and killed by Divine Will sect. And there was only one pill left on Yi Liuli's body. In the dark, Lu Yi spied some guidance. All kinds of signs indicated that he needed to take Yi Liuli to Medical Valley. Otherwise, the next time Yi Liuli had an outburst, there would be no medicine to use. After half a month of cultivation, he had gained a lot. However, cultivation wasn't something that could be done behind closed doors. That was why many cultivators would go out and travel. If he stayed in domineering Saber Mountain Villa, with the many formations he had set up before, even if Divine Will sect really attacked, they might not be able to do anything to him. However, since he had come to this arcane realm, he couldn't stay here forever. Sixth brother. Yi Liuli's weak voice came from inside the room. It seemed that she had woken up. Lu Yi turned and walked in. He saw that she was lying weakly on the bed. Her clothes had already been changed by Yi. Lu Yi sat beside her. Yi Liuli raised her hand and grabbed his clothes. She looked helpless and weak. "Do you feel uncomfortable anywhere?" Lu Yi asked. He raised his hand to feel the temperature of her forehead. It was still a little cold, but it was within the normal range. It wasn't as exaggerated as before. Yi Liuli shook her head lightly and said softly, "Sixth brother, don't worry. I'll be fine soon." Sixth brother Yi wasn't in domineering Saber Mountain Villa all year round, so he had never personally encountered such a thing. However, Yi Liuli knew her own situation. When her old illness acted up, she was in so much pain that she wanted to die. However, after it passed, she would be safe and sound. "Take a nap. You'll be fine when you wake up." Yi Liuli followed his advice and gently closed her eyes. However, her small hand was still holding onto Lu Ye's clothes. It was as if she was holding on to not only her only family in this world, but also her last hope. After a while, Yi Liuli's breathing gradually calmed down. Lu Yi picked up her hand and put it back under the blanket. He gave Yi a look. He understood and followed him out of the room. Lu Yi took out a large formation jade pendant and gave it to her. He instructed, "When we can leave, I'll inform you. Bring her to me." He instantly saw through Lu Ye's plan. She wasn't too worried. Lu Yi had survived many big battles like the Cloudy River battlefield. There was no reason for him to fail in this small dragon soaring realm. However, she still couldn't help but remind him, "Be careful." Lu Yi raised his hand and patted her head, gently rubbing it. Only then did he turn and walk out. Since he had decided to leave, the first thing he had to deal with was the cultivators of Divine Will sect outside. Otherwise, if he brought Yi Liuli with him, it would be difficult for him to escape. Ever since a Divine Will sect elder fell into domineering Saber Mountain Villa, no one dared to casually barge in. However, this didn't mean that they had left. Such a sudden change in domineering Saber Mountain Villa, and even Vice Sect Master Pang Wanhai was killed. How could Divine Will sect let this go? The cultivators of Divine Will sect didn't dare to barge in. They could only monitor the situation outside. Because no one could hide forever. As long as Lu Yi dared to show himself, they could gang up and attack him. In a pavilion outside the villa, Divine Will sect's third elder, Pei Yuan Hua, stared at the silent domineering Saber Mountain Villa with his hands behind his back. Divine Will sect had two 9th Order Cloud River Realm cultivators. One was Sect Master Xiong Tai Shan, while the other was Vice Sect Master Pang Wanhai. The elders under them were all 8th Order cultivators. There were about a dozen of them. This kind of foundation was considered good in the entire Soaring Dragon realm. However, compared to the real top forces, there was still a big gap. The gap was in the number of 8th and 9th order Cloud River Realm cultivators. Which top force didn't have dozens or hundreds of them? A force like Divine Will Sect was considered good, but it was only a tyrant in Feng Province. As the third elder, he had personally come out to deal with the matter of domineering Saber Mountain Villa. It was enough to show the importance of Divine Will Sect. He had no choice but to take this seriously. A vice sect master was dead, and the 9th elder had also been trapped inside without any news. It was highly likely that he would not survive. In the entire Divine Will Sect, there were only 3 people who were stronger than him. The sect master and great elder had been injured by Yi Ying when they tried to kill him. Now, they were both recovering from their injuries. The second elder needed to oversee Divine Will Sect. As the third elder, he had no choice but to step up. Jing Jing walked to Tang San's side and sat down cross-legged beside him. She nodded lightly at him. Tang San narrowed his eyes. His body slowly floated up. He stood up on the heart of the paradise flower. He took a deep breath. The aura in his body surged. The 9 bloodlines in his body had completely reached a state of balance after the fusion just now. His body began to evolve rapidly. On his forehead, the light pattern of the golden trident reappeared. At this moment, Tang San's aura began to transform. His divine sense fused with the golden trident's brand. Sensing the aura of the golden trident, his eyes began to shine brighter. The sound of waves, like chanting, rang out beside him. An intense light began to rise rapidly. A huge golden shadow was reflected behind him. Tang San's eyes flashed like lightning. He stared at the sky. Suddenly, a loud bang erupted from the paradise flower, and a huge golden pillar of light soared into the sky, piercing through the clouds. Not far away, the heavenly fox great demon emperor felt a shocking will erupt. The entire hell garden trembled violently. The flowers began to wither rapidly. All of the luck seemed to be condensing toward the golden pillar of light. His expression changed drastically. He did not dare to be negligent. With a shake of his body, he revealed his true form. He had transformed into a 9-tailed fox that was more than 100 meters long. Each of his tails was more than 300 meters long. His 9 tails covered the sky. He emitted a large amount of luck and injected it into Hellgarden, stabilizing the realm. Hellgarden must not be destroyed. Otherwise, it would be a devastating disaster for the Heavenly Foxes. Ancestral Court, Sacred Heavenly Fox Mountain. The golden light that had been restrained suddenly became intense again. Not only that, but the sacred Heavenly Fox Mountain's body also emitted a white light. However, the white light seemed to be collapsing inward. A golden beam of light shot up into the sky without any warning, instantly soaring high into the sky. The rulers, who had just resisted another heavenly tribulation, subconsciously scattered. In the next moment, the golden pillar of light had already rushed into the tribulation cloud. The pitch-black tribulation cloud was instantly lit up and turned into dark golden clouds. All of the purple color disappeared at this moment. Instead, it was replaced by huge golden thunderbolts. It seemed to have filled the entire realm with anger. Chapter 696. Pei Yuanhua was 70 years old, but due to his cultivation, he looked like he was in his 40s or 50s with a ruddy face. Logically speaking, with Yi Ying's death and the Yi family's annihilation, the tyrannical Saber Mountain Villa should have been destroyed. But now, in his eyes, the mountain villa was like a sleeping beast that could erupt at any time and bare its fangs. The 9th elder's strength was almost the same as his, but he had disappeared without a trace after exploring the tyrannical Saber Mountain Villa once. How could he not be afraid? He could not understand how things had developed to this point. No one knew how Pang Wanhai had died. Although many people had escaped from the tyrannical Saber Mountain Villa that day, no one had witnessed the battle with their own eyes. However, from the information they had, there should be an expert behind Yi Lu, and that expert's attainments in array Dao were extremely high. At the very least, they were much higher than the 9th elder. Because the 9th elder was also an array cultivator, he had volunteered to investigate the tyrannical Saber Mountain Villa a few days ago, but he had disappeared just like that. I don't believe you can hide there forever. Pei Yuanhua gnashed his teeth as he looked in the direction of the tyrannical saber mountain villa. Powerful array cultivators were indeed frightening, but array cultivators themselves were not very strong. As long as they were not given space to display their abilities, they were not a threat. The Divine Will sect had suffered heavy casualties this time, but the tyrannical saber technique had not succeeded. Xiong Taishan was furious, and if not for the fact that he needed to treat his injuries, he would have come personally. But before that he had already given Pei Yuanhua a death order to kill the 2 Yi family brats. Having cultivated in the soaring dragon realm for so many years, how could he not know the principle of eliminating the source of trouble? As long as the 2 Yi family brats were alive, he would not be able to live in peace. Suddenly, a scream and spiritual energy fluctuation came from a certain direction. Pei Yuanhua immediately turned his head and looked in that direction, only to see a sharp blade light flickering a few miles away. The Divine Will sect cultivators responsible for monitoring the movements of the tyrannical Saber Mountain Villa had been killed and their blood flowed like a river. Amidst the blade light, a youth's figure could be seen moving. How dare you! Pei Yuanhua was furious. With a flick of his sleeve, he jumped up like an eagle and pounced in that direction. He had been fretting over how to find that brat from the Yi clan. He had not expected that the brat would show up of his own accord and even dare to kill his Divine Will sect's disciples. Before this, no one had actually discovered how he had walked out of the tyrannical Saber Villa. Several miles away, Lu Yi stood with his saber in hand, surrounded by several corpses. The Divine Will sect only thought that there was a hidden expert behind him. They didn't expect that the hegemonic Saber Mountain Villa's array formations were all his own. Not only was he proficient in formations, but he was also proficient in concealment and assassination. The current Yi Lu was no longer the original Yi Lu of the Soaring Dragon Realm. He was the famous Yi Lu of the Spirit Stream battlefield, the Spirit Stream 3 disasters. The cultivators of the Divine Will sect didn't have high cultivation levels to begin with. So how could they survive after he had sneaked up on them? In fact, if Lu Yi wanted to, he could even kill Pei Yuanhua. However, his goal was not simply to kill the enemy. He wanted to lure the people from the Divine Will sect away, which was why he had taken the initiative to expose himself. When he looked up, he saw a figure pouncing towards him from several miles away. This figure's aura was at the level of an 8th-order Cloud River realm. He immediately understood that this was one of the higher-ups of the Divine Will sect, most likely an elder. In the distance, Lu Yi was stepping on a Divine Will sect disciple. The disciple had not died yet and was still struggling, but he could not get up under Lu Ye's restraint. Pei Yuanhua shouted angrily, "Junior, don't be so arrogant." As if responding to his words, Lu Yi exerted force with his foot, causing the Divine Will sect disciple's chest to cave in. The disciple spat out a mouthful of blood mixed with pieces of internal organs as his vitality dissipated. "You're courting death." Pei Yuanhua was even more furious. He naturally didn't care about the life or death of a disciple. What angered him was Lu Ye's attitude. This brat was clearly provoking him. In the blink of an eye, they were only half a mile apart. Only then did Lu Yi calmly fly up and flee into the distance. In an instant, near the tyrannical Saber Mountain Manor, streams of light shot up into the sky like a meteor shower, chasing after Lu Yi. On the small island at the center of Saber Lake, Yi heard the commotion outside and knew that Lu Yi had already made his move. However, she didn't act rashly. Instead, she asked Hupa to stay behind and look after Yi Luli while she quietly snuck out and investigated the surroundings of the mountain manor. She really did find a few Divine Will sect disciples guarding the mountain manor. However, these people's cultivations weren't high. After Yi's sudden sneak attack, they had no chance to fight back and died one after another. After an incense stick's worth of time, the Snow-White Tiger's vigorous figure rushed out of the tyrannical Saber Mountain Manor. On its back sat 2 girls. All the way north, 100 miles east of the tyrannical Saber Mountain Manor, there was a narrow valley. Under Lu Ye's intentional or unintentional actions and the efforts of the Divine Will sect's cultivators, he was finally trapped here with no way out. "Brat, Let's see if you can survive this. Pei Yuanhua shouted angrily. Lu Yi slowly unsheathed his saber. The sound of his saber being unsheathed was long and hoarse, making those who heard it feel as if ants were crawling on their hearts. It was extremely uncomfortable. Lu Ye's eyes drooped as he spoke. I don't know if I'll die or not, but... His figure suddenly turned into a blur and instantly arrived in front of Pei Yuanhua. His speed was so fast that Pei Yuanhua's expression changed greatly. Was this brat pretending to be a pig to eat a tiger? This laughable thought suddenly appeared in Pei Yuanhua's mind, but his body had already reacted instinctively. A spirit artifact that resembled a ferrule suddenly appeared in his hand. He poured his spiritual energy into it, causing it to split into several shadows that shot towards Lu Ye's head. However, in the next instant he felt as if he had fallen into an ice cellar. It was clearly daytime, but in his perception, it felt as if the curtain of night had suddenly descended, followed by specks of starlight blooming in his field of vision. An indescribable sense of invasion and oppression pressed down on him like a mountain, causing his body to stiffen. The tyrannical saber art. Pei Yuanhua was greatly shocked because the power of this saber had exceeded his imagination. He had also participated in the battle against Yi Ying. Before Yi Ying had died, he had used this saber. Under that saber, Xiong Taishan and the Great Elder had both been injured. The reason why he had been able to escape unscathed was mainly because Yi Ying's saber had not been aimed at him. However, having personally experienced the power of that saber, he naturally had a deep impression of it. Compared to Yi Ying's saber, Sixth Ye's saber was not as good, but it did not seem to be too far off. This brat was so young, so how could he have cultivated the tyrant saber art to such a level? He had never heard of this brat having such a high level of attainment in the tyrant saber art before. What he did not know was that Yi Ying could only enter the inheritance space once every half a month to a month, but recently, Lu Yi had been entering 4 or 5 times a day. What he had obtained in half a month was equivalent to what Yi Ying had obtained in 7 or 8 years. In terms of cultivating the tyrant saber art, Lu Yi could already be considered a beginner. He could barely use the first move of the tyrant saber art. It was probably not as good as Yi Ying's, but it was still much stronger than Yi Xiong's. Along with this saber strike, Lu Ye's essence, qi, and soul poured out. Originally, Lu Yi didn't need to use the tyrant saber art to deal with an 8th order cultivator. This saber technique was terrifyingly powerful, but it also consumed a lot of energy. However, Lu Yi still used it, mainly because he wanted to test the results of his recent cultivation. He needed a target to test his strength on in order to understand his gains and losses. Otherwise, if he just practiced on his own, many of his shortcomings would be difficult to detect. In Pei Yuanhua's field of vision, under the night sky, starlight shrouded the sky, but in the eyes of the many divine will sect disciples, the heavens and earth had lost all color, leaving only this bright saber light. The ruler shadow collapsed and Lu Ye's figure brushed past Pei Yuanhua's shoulder, the latter half of his sentence slowly leaving his mouth. In any case, you're definitely dead. Behind him, Pei Yuanhua stood frozen in place, as if he had been struck by a lightning talisman. His face was twitching, and his eyes were quickly filled with shock. How could this Yi family's 6th brother be so strong? Although the tyrant saber art was amazing, it required a corresponding cultivation to fully display its power. Yi Lu was just a trivial 6th order cultivator, so even if he could use the tyrant saber art, it should be impossible for him to kill Lu Yi. But in fact, a trace of understanding appeared in Lu Ye's heart. This little brat was really pretending to be a pig to eat a tiger. Divine Will Sect had underestimated him all this time, and if he didn't die, Divine Will Sect would be doomed. Specks of red seeped out and soon dyed Pei Yuanhua's clothes red. From the outside, Pei Yuanhua didn't seem to be injured, but in fact, his heart had been pierced. The first form of the tyrant saber was a straight stab. Accompanied by a long breath, Lu Ye's body fell heavily to the ground. The group of Divine Will Sect disciples were frightened out of their wits. Under the leadership of Third Elder, they had finally managed to trap Yi Lu here. They had thought it would be a casual battle, but before they could even begin, their Third Elder had fallen. No one present had been able to clearly see what had happened. "Third Elder?" Someone called out in a trembling voice, imagining that Third Elder would suddenly stand up and continue to lead them, but there was no response. "Ah!" Cries of alarm rang out. Their strongest Third Elder had been killed by Yi Lu in a single blow, so how could they possibly be his opponent? However, there were still some bold and careful disciples who saw that many of their companions were frightened out of their wits and immediately shouted, "Let's attack together, he's just one person." In this situation, they couldn't scatter and escape, otherwise, they would be giving the enemy a chance to kill them one by one. If they worked together, they might still have a chance to survive. His words woke everyone up from their daze, and the other Divine Will sect disciples who were still in shock came back to their senses. Yes, although Yi Lu was powerful, he was still just one person. There were more than 30 Divine Will sect disciples present, so if they attacked together, how could they fail? Moreover, they had heard that the Tyrant Saber art consumed a lot of energy, so Yi Lu might have already used up all his energy. However, this fantasy was quickly shattered, because as soon as that person finished speaking, Lu Yi moved. Yi Xiong had used up all his energy after using the Tyrant Saber art, but that was because his cultivation of the Tyrant Saber art hadn't reached perfection. To Lu Yi, the Tyrant Saber art consumed a lot of energy, but it was still within an acceptable range. Right now, he still had the energy to fight. To be continued. Chapter 697. Lu Ye's fighting style was aggressive to begin with, but this had nothing to do with his temperament. It was mainly due to his experience. His temperament was actually relatively calm, and he was definitely not an overbearing person. But before he started cultivating, he was a slave miner in Evil Moon Valley. It was a dog-eat-dog place. In such an environment, if one wasn't ruthless enough, they wouldn't be able to survive. The battles between mortals were sometimes more tragic than cultivators. Later, he was accepted by sect Master Tang Yifeng as a disciple and entered the Blue Blood sect. But before he could even see the sect, he was sent to the Spirit Stream battlefield. He was alone and had no one to rely on. Facing all kinds of enemies, he could only break through with strength. There was no room for retreat. So, when it came to fighting, he had always adhered to a philosophy, or rather, a habit. He was brave and oppressive, and regardless of whether he could win, he couldn't lose in terms of momentum. His fighting style was undoubtedly in line with the essence of the Tyrant Saber art. This was also the reason why he was able to achieve such a high level of attainment in the Tyrant Saber art in just half a month. Not only could he use the soul water to relieve the pressure on his divine soul, but more importantly, the Tyrant Saber art was compatible with him. If it were another cultivator with a weak temperament, they might not be able to achieve such growth no matter how much soul water they had. If their compatibility was not compatible, it would be meaningless to study hard. Although the secret inheritance of the Tyrant Saber art only contained 3 forms of the Tyrant Saber, and Lu Yi had only learned the first form, the Tyrant Saber art contained more than just these 3 forms. This was a complete saber art in itself. In the process of cultivating the first form, Lu Yi undoubtedly had a very deep understanding and comprehension of this saber art. At this moment, the pressure he felt was much stronger than before. In the eyes of many Divine Will sect disciples, Lu Yi was no longer human. He was clearly a tiger coming down from the mountains, a dragon coming out of the sea, ready to devour people. No cultivator could survive a single blow from him. As the saber flashed, screams rang out. Corpses fell to the ground, and blood stained the ground. In less than 20 breaths of time, more than 30 Divine Will sect cultivators had knocked down more than 10 people. Lu Yi was unscathed. In the Soaring Dragon realm, the 8th and 9th order cultivators who hadn't made any progress in their cultivation did indeed have a lot of time to polish their fighting skills, so they were generally stronger than the 8th and 9th order cultivators of the 9 provinces. However, this didn't include the disciples of the Divine Will sect. Among these people, the highest cultivation was only at the 7th order, and there were only 3 of them. The rest were all below the 7th order, and there were even some at the 1st or 2nd order of Cloud River realm. With Lu Ye's current strength, killing such an opponent was a piece of cake. It was as easy as chopping up vegetables, and he could kill a little kid with a single slash. As Lu Yi moved around, he sensed the Pan Mountain saber in his hand, feeling the might of each saber strike. His understanding of the tyrant's saber art deepened. Not only did his aura not weaken, but it also grew stronger as he fought. Oh my God! Finally, some of the Divine Will sect's disciples couldn't take it anymore. With a roar, they turned around and ran away. They had thought that even if the third elder had died in battle, they would still be able to take down Lu Yi. They had thought that after Lu Yi used the tyrant saber technique, even if he wasn't completely exhausted, he would be an arrow at the end of its flight. However, in the end, they still thought that he would die. After more than half of them were killed or injured, the panic in their hearts finally took over, and they followed their instincts to survive. However, just as they moved, a buzzing sound rang out, and several streams of light shot towards them. Their protective spirit chi was broken, and the streams of light pierced through their bodies, bringing with them a few puffs of blood. Under the powerful force of inertia, their corpses flew a few meters forward and fell to the ground. Run in different directions. Now, someone roared. What if they couldn't defeat the enemy? Naturally, they could only run. What if they couldn't escape? They just had to run faster than their companions. That was what everyone was thinking. After that roar, there were only 8 disciples of the Divine Will sect left alive. The 8 of them fled in 8 different directions, each of them activating their own life-saving secret techniques. For a moment, streams of light of various colors flashed in all directions. As expected, Lu Yi couldn't chase after all of them. The Imperial artifact in his box buzzed as he attacked 2 of them while he pounced on another. After killing this person, he quickly turned around and pounced on another. It was a good idea to escape in different directions. If it was used to deal with other cultivators, it might be effective. However, if they weren't fast enough, it would be meaningless. After half a cup of tea's time, Lu Yi had chased them for 15 kilometers and killed the last Divine Will sect's cultivator with his saber. At this point, the enemies who were chasing after him were all wiped out. Lu Yi sheathed his saber with a calm expression. His eyes flickered as he thought about the gains and losses of this battle. It had to be said that cultivating the tyrant saber technique for half a month had brought him great improvement. Compared to half a month ago, his cultivation base hadn't increased much, but his attainments in saber techniques had improved tremendously. Most importantly, he now had his own set of saber techniques. He had his own set of techniques in the past, but they were scattered, which was reflected in the process of him fighting his enemies. He didn't have the ability to summarize them. Now, with the help of the tyrant saber technique, he had an intuitive understanding of his saber technique system. This was very beneficial. To put it simply, Lu Ye's previous cultivation in saber techniques was almost like a blind man walking. Wherever he went, he might occasionally hit a wall or something. Even if he extorted a lot of saber techniques from the Wild Saber sect, which allowed him to take fewer detours, he was still blind in the end. Now it was different. There was light in his eyes, and there was a path in front of him. It was the path of saber techniques. As long as he continued to cultivate along this path, he could continuously improve his attainments in saber techniques. This was his path, which was different from the improvement of his cultivation base. The improvement of his cultivation base was a broad path shared by all cultivators. As long as he cultivated step by step, cultivators could go further and further on this broad path. However, no matter which cultivator it was, they should have their own path. It wasn't easy. It had been 2 or 3 years since he started cultivating. It was only today that he finally saw the path in front of him. Lu Yi couldn't help but sigh. After taking out a few spirit pills and swallowing them, Lu Yi began to contact Yi. After confirming the direction, he began to head north. A day later, at the border of Feng State and Jia State, Rui City, Taiyan Restaurant. This was the largest and most luxurious restaurant in the entire Rui City. It was full of guests every day. On the 3rd floor of the restaurant, Lu Yi, and Yi Lioli sat at a table, eating a few of the restaurant's signature dishes. Lu Yi rarely went to places like restaurants. Looking at his life after he stepped into cultivation, He was either cultivating or being hunted down. He didn't have the leisure to be so elegant. The reason he came here was Yi Liuli's suggestion. Because she remembered that when she was young, when she followed Ying north, they passed by Rui City and had a meal in this restaurant. However, she was still young at that time and couldn't remember many things clearly. Now that Ying was gone, her elder brother was like a father. Lu Yi took her along, walking the same path as when she was young and eating the same dishes as when she was young. Lu Yi naturally didn't mind and let her do as she pleased. There were many cultivators in the restaurant, and even more mortals. This was the atmosphere of the entire soaring dragon realm. The boundary between cultivators and mortals was very blurry. This made Lu Yi feel strange. Since entering the spirit stream battlefield, he hadn't seen a single mortal. All the cultivators he came into contact with were all cultivators of similar cultivation levels as him. He didn't even know what the atmosphere in the 9 states was like. Many guests were eating and stuffing themselves. There were also storytellers telling novel stories in a cadence. There were even people talking loudly. Restaurants, tea houses, brothels had always been places where dragons and snakes mixed together. Have you heard that 3 days ago, Senior Lisa of the Imperial Heavenly Sect passed away? Someone's voice suddenly rang out. As this voice rang out, the noisy restaurant suddenly fell silent. Many people looked surprised. Obviously, they hadn't heard the news. The transmission of information in the soaring dragon realm wasn't as convenient as in the 9 states. If it was in the 9 states, such a big matter could spread to any corner with cultivators in half a day. The Imperial Heavenly Sect was an extremely ancient sect. The current situation in the soaring dragon realm was quite strange. The upper limit of cultivators' cultivation was very low. No matter how hard they cultivated, they couldn't break through the shackles of the Cloud River realm. Therefore, almost all the sects, big or small, had 9th order cultivators. If one's cultivation wasn't at the 9th order, they would be too embarrassed to establish a sect. The difference was that the number of 9th order cultivators was different. The more 9th order cultivators there were, the stronger the sect would naturally be. In the entire world, the Imperial Heavenly Sect was undoubtedly one of the overlords. The other 2 recognized overlords were the Vajra Temple and Howran Academy. The 3 overlords were divided into 3 sides in the soaring dragon realm, dominating each realm. There were many sects in this world. In the end, there were still some sects that were similar to these 3 on the surface, but only these 3 were recognized as overlords. This wasn't just because they were strong enough, but more importantly because of their inheritances. These 3 sects, they were all great sects that existed 1,000 years ago. As early as 1,000 years ago, they were already the overlords of the soaring dragon realm. In the 9 states, sects with 1,000-year-old inheritances weren't much. They could be said to be everywhere. But the soaring dragon realm was different. The upper limit of a cultivator was too low. When the inheritance was passed down from generation to generation, it was very easy to have some situations where there was a shortage of manpower. Once or twice, the foundation of a sect would be damaged. If it happened too many times, the sect would inevitably weaken and eventually be destroyed. For example, the tyrannical Saber Villa had only existed for 20 years, and now it was gone. There were many rising and destroyed forces like the tyrannical Saber Villa in the soaring dragon realm. The great sects of the 9 states wouldn't be like this. As long as there was a Spirit Sea realm cultivator in charge, even if 1 or 2 generations didn't have outstanding missions, there would always be a 3rd or 4th generation. There would always be a chance for them to stand up again. The Sacred Flame Sect, Golden Cloud Tower, and 100 Refinements Valley were forcefully knocked down from 1st grade great sects to 4th grade great sects. There were no signs of them being destroyed because their foundations were strong enough. If the sects of the soaring dragon realm were to suffer such a blow, they would have long disappeared. Compared to the 2 realms, the survival of the sects of the soaring dragon realm was undoubtedly much more fragile. Therefore, the sects that could maintain their overlord status from 1,000 years ago until now were extremely difficult to deal with. You're tuning in to the Han Lee's Immortal Journey YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.